At this point in the conversation, Xianxia had come to a complete understanding. He realized that he wasn't the only one who'd seen through the sovereign sex master's plans, and even his master, Fuxi, had seen through it a long time ago. Xianxia said, "In other words, the sovereign sex master's control over the order of the heaven Tao is equivalent to upsetting the balance, and even master who's in the Tao terra firma will probably be unable to keep the sovereign sex master busy." Jiyu nodded and said, "That's roughly how it is, but it's even more dangerous than you imagine. Presently, your master, Nuwa, Lu Xinji, and the others have gathered within the Tao terra firma, and only then are they able to barely resist the sovereign sex master. However, the situation is getting more and more pressing after the sovereign sex master took control of the energy of the heaven Tao." Jiyu's voice carried a trace of worry as he finished speaking. Xianxia took a deep breath and said, "Don't worry, Martial Uncle. The sovereign sex master will definitely not kill them before I arrive at the Tao terra firma." Jiyu was stunned. "Why are you so sure?" Xianxia said calmly, "It's very simple. He's very clearly aware that I'd definitely rather abandon my path towards the Tao than step foot into the Tao terra firma if Master and the others are dead. If I don't head to the Tao terra firma, then all his plans would have been in vain." Xianxia paused for a moment and continued, "Under such circumstances, the sovereign sex master will definitely not act rashly." Jiyu pondered deeply for a long time before he said, "How confident are you towards your trip to the Tao terra firma?" Xianxia shrugged. "I'll only know once I get there." As he spoke, Xianxia stood up and said, "Martial Uncle, I don't have any other worries since you're protecting Tao Emperor Academy. So, I intend to leave immediately for the Tao terra firma." Jiyu frowned and said, "Do you really not intend to meet everyone in the academy?" Xianxia raised his head. His gaze passed through space and descended upon Tao Emperor Academy, which was far away in the distance. He said after a long time passed, "Since my clone is there in Tao Emperor Academy, I can instantly find out about everything that has occurred during the past few years." As he spoke, his figure had gradually become indistinct, and he was about to vanish when he said, "Martial Uncle, farewell." Jiyu took a deep breath and said seriously, "Take care of yourself. I'll be waiting for your return." He'd just finished speaking when Xianxia's figure had vanished. "Success or failure hinges on him," Jiyu muttered. "Martial Uncle." Suddenly, a tall figure flashed over from afar. He had a handsome appearance and a deep gaze. He was Xianxia's clone. "What are you doing here?" Jiyu turned around and saw the clone, which looked exactly like Xianxia. He was clearly aware that Xianxia hadn't contacted this clone of his. "I was meditating just now when I suddenly sensed a trace of a familiar aura, but it vanished in the blink of an eye. It's truly strange." Xianxia's clone frowned as he spoke. "It was an old friend that came here, and he just left." Jiyu spoke casually. "Who?" Xianxia's clone was surprised. He was a part of Xianxia, so their thoughts, wisdom, and even physical body were all from the same source. However, the clone had only been unable to notice Xianxia because Xianxia wasn't willing to see him right now. "He'll be back soon, and you'll understand then." Jiyu glanced at Xianxia's clone with a thought-provoking gaze. Xianxia's clone was stunned on the spot, while a thought couldn't help but appear in his mind. Was it my main body? After that, he shook his head. If it was my main body, then I would have probably realized a long time ago. Looks like that old friend is probably someone else. Throughout these years after Xianxia's main body had left the immortal dimension, his clone had been living in seclusion within Tao Emperor Academy and had shut himself away from the outside world. However, he'd noticed everything that had occurred within Tao Emperor Academy. He did that so that his main body could immediately obtain knowledge about everything that had occurred throughout the years upon its return. "Let's go." Jiyu's figure flashed towards the academy. Xianxia's clone took a deep breath, and then his gaze recovered its calm before he chased after Jiyu. The mortal dimension, the dark reverie, the unknown lands. It was called unknown because it was indescribable and not well known to the inhabitants of the world. So, it had undoubtedly added a mysterious veil onto this area in the dark reverie. Since the ancient times until now, The cultivators of the Dark Reverie had always considered the unknown lands to be the minor immortal dimension, and it was said to be the closest to the immortal dimension. However, all of those cultivators weren't aware that the unknown lands was actually the most mysterious place throughout the three dimensions and even the entire world. There were numerous sects here like the Saintly Land of Ascension, the Diana Forest Temple, the Integration Sect, and the First Heaven Devil Sect. There were also numerous ancient sects that had vanished through the boundless annals of time. Most of them only had a single successor, and they seemed extremely mysterious as well. However, as far as Xianxia was concerned, the most mysterious place in the unknown lands was the Tao Terra Firma. Swish! At this moment, space fluctuated here as Xianxia traveled through the unknown lands. His speed didn't seem to be swift, yet a single step of his caused his figure to immediately vanish. It was utterly impossible for others to notice him. The world was very unique here. It was boundless, ancient, desolate, and primitive. Regardless of whether it was the landscape or the plants here, everything was suffused by a heavy and ancient aura. It was like a primitive place that hadn't been explored, and walking into it was like arriving at the period when the chaos had just been split open. There weren't any signs of life here. All along the way, indescribable emotions had arisen in Xianxia's heart for no reason. It was like he wanted to return to the Tao Terra Firma, yet also seemed like he yearned for something, but he wasn't able to put a finger on it. Xianxia paid no attention to the indescribable emotions he experienced. He was just continuing forward. However, his expression was growing increasingly calmer and indifferent, while his deep eyes that were like two abysses reflected everything in the world and seemed to hold the alternation between all Daos, yet there weren't any ripples within them. They were calm like his heart. His heart was boundless like the world, and it had fused with the world. Just his journey forward had actually continued for a few days. All along the way, Xianxia noticed many variant beasts that only existed during the primeval times, and he even noticed the auras of a few cultivators scattered all over. But all of this wasn't able to draw his attention at all. Moreover, he hadn't caused any commotion as he traveled all along the way. Xianxia finally stopped after traveling for 7 days. At this moment, the veil of night was dark as ink, and countless stars flickered throughout the veil of night that covered the world while sending clear silver radiance down to the ground below. Besides that, there was only a light breeze whistling through the deathly silent ancient world. A winding river resided before Xianxia. The water of the river was clear, and it gurgled endlessly and emanated tinkling that was pleasing to the ear. As the silver starlight rained down upon the surface of the river, it enshrouded the river in dreamlike mist and caused it to seem mysterious. If one looked down from high above in the sky, one would notice that the winding river just happened to form the ancient character for destiny. While being illuminated by the silver starlight, the river surged through the river in incessant cycles. Xianxia was clearly aware that while this river seemed ordinary, didn't possess any aura, and even seemed very insignificant, but only the extraordinary experts who'd laid eyes on the secrets of the ultimate path could see the river. Conversely, all other cultivators would see nothing, because this river had a name which made countless cultivators yearn to lay eyes on it. The River of Destiny. It was the true River of Destiny. The River of Destiny that Xianxia had observed in his mind was a strand of aura emanated by the Grand Tao of Destiny. On the other hand, this river was the true River of Destiny. It was just flowing calmly and normally here without end, but only few throughout the world were able to lay eyes on it. After he arrived at the unknown lands, Xianxia had noticed the River of Destiny at once, so he traveled towards it. The jade slip Zhan Liuqing's master, Taoist Dao Ke, left behind had no records about the River of Destiny, but there was a clue that pointed towards this area. So, it was clear that the Tao Terra Firma was hidden within the River of Destiny. Xianxia even didn't have to deduce it before he was sure of it, because he'd immediately noticed the entrance when he faced the River of Destiny. The river was shaped in the form of the character. At the bottom left of this character was the character, which represented entrance, so that was the way into the Tao Terra Firma. Swoosh! In an instant, Xianxia's figure flashed into the air above the river, and then his figure was covered in silver starlight and seemed dreamlike as he vanished. The Tao Terra Firma. the place where the chaos of the three dimensions and all the Daos in the world had been born. The three dimensions, the ancient God domain, and even both Godsbane heaven and origin heaven had been born from within the Tao terra firma. It was even to the extent that this place could be considered the place where chaos, the myriad of Daos, and all worlds had been created. The river diagram was created here as well. The laws and order of destiny were created here as well, and it traversed through both past and present as it carried the evolution of countless civilizations. This was the origin of all things, the beginning of everything. The ultimate path towards the Tao and the end of the Tao were hidden here as well. The beginning and the end had always been a process in the cycle of samsara. Only supreme figures who possessed extraordinary ability and had laid eyes on the secrets of the ultimate path could arrive here. In his days, Xianxia noticed that he seemed to be traveling against the current of the river of destiny and was pursuing its source. He swept the surroundings with his gaze, yet everything was indistinct. He investigated with his consciousness, yet he could only detect a void in the surroundings. He tried to move, yet he could only move along with the forces acting upon him. At this moment, he was like a child returning to his mother's body. It was vigilance and powerlessness that surged into his heart, and it was a form of calmness and anticipation from returning instead. After an unknown period of time passed, Xianxia's heavy and dazed consciousness suddenly shook, and then his field of vision instantly recovered its clarity. An expanse of true chaos appeared before his eyes. There was no space, time, or anything here. There was only chaos energy that enshrouded and drifted through the boundless surroundings. This was a very unique feeling. Xianxia had entered into many expanses of space that seemed like chaos, yet none of them were able to provide him such a clear experience of what chaos was. For example, he was standing here at this moment because he could control space, and he'd instinctively created an expanse of space for himself to stand on. If he intended to move forward, then he definitely had to utilize the grand Tao of space which he possessed to create a path for himself. The Tao terra firma, it was where the mother of all things resided, and it contained the quintessence of everything. It was filled with an expanse of chaos. Time and space didn't exist here, and all things in the world had vanished. It was heavy and mysterious. Xianxia stood silently on the spot for a long time before he suddenly took a step forward, and then the profundities of space surged out as he started walking through the chaos. The profundities of time surged out as well, and it allowed Xianxia to be clearly aware of the passage of time as he took every single step. He seemed to walk endlessly through the world of chaos yet still hadn't noticed anything worthy of his attention. The world was just filled with an expanse of gray emptiness. It seemed like there was nothing, and it showed signs of emptiness. It was huge yet empty. This place really was too huge, and it was seemingly boundless. After traveling for a long time, Xianxia gazed at the scene of chaos around him and suddenly realized that he seemed to be lost. He realized that he would probably never be able to find his way if he were to continue walking aimlessly like this. Swish! Xianxia issued a command in his heart, and then a myriad of stars surged into appearance and flowed with dazzling and clear radiance. It was the laws of star. Next, land appeared and formed into the shape of a world. It was the laws of the heavens and the earth. After that, mountains sprouted from the ground. Rivers surged incessantly. A scorching sun illuminated the world from high above. It was the laws of the five elements. In next to no time, a world had taken shape. From the beginning until the end, Xianxia hadn't utilized even a trace of his strength, and he just needed a single thought to turn his thoughts into reality within this world of chaos. He was like a true god of creation. Even if the world around him was completely empty, anything could be formed out of nothing so long as the thought of it had appeared in his heart. Xianxia suddenly had a moment of clarity. While the Tao terra firma seemed to be completely empty, it actually held all things, principles, laws, order, and just about everything in the world. It was truly capable of accommodating everything, and that was why it was said to be the source of all things. Xianxia pondered deeply for a short moment before he tapped lightly with the tip of his finger, and then the world which had just taken form suddenly collapsed into pieces. It returned once more into a state of chaos as if everything which occurred just now was only an illusion. A strange expression arose in Xianxia's eyes when he witnessed all of that. So this is the energy of Genesis. It's the source of the beginning, the mother of all things. Once he understood that, the chaos in the surroundings suddenly surged, and then it actually instantly vanished completely. After that, an empty, ethereal, and boundlessly large world appeared within his field of vision. It was like an expanse of outer space that was devoid of any stars, yet it also seemed like a boundless area without a sky or ground. It was empty and large. That was the true appearance of the Tao Terra Firma. "Little fellow, you're finally here." Suddenly, an indistinct voice that was filled with a supremely dignified tone resounded as if it was a decree of the heavens. The sovereign sex master. Xianxia's eyes narrowed, and then he saw an expanse of chaotic clouds suddenly appeared extremely far away in the distance. The clouds covered the world and were boundlessly vast. Xianxia simply seemed like a drop in the ocean when compared to it. Countless clear and lustrous divine chains of order were like huge dragons that were interweaved around the cloud, and they flowed with the extremely terrifying and supremely dignified aura that belonged solely to the order of the Heaven Tao. The sovereign sex master's voice had come from that expanse of chaotic clouds. Even though it was extremely far away, Xianxia had still immediately determined that the clear and lustrous divine chains of order possessed the unique aura of God's Bane Heaven. However, unlike before, the energy of order which belonged to God's Bane Heaven was being controlled by a mysterious and mighty force, and it seemed extraordinarily tame. Obviously, the sovereign sex master had started to take full control of the energy of God's Bane Heaven. This undoubtedly proved that his current strength was superior to the Heaven Tao which covered the world. He'd even brought the Heaven Tao beneath his feet. How terrifying was that? Xianxia's thoughts flashed in his heart before he recovered a composed and tranquil state. He faintly noticed that the reason the sovereign sex master was capable of accomplishing this was probably because he'd obtained a strand of the true secrets of Genesis energy from the Tao Terra Firma. However, that wasn't important, because since the sovereign sex master had waited until now, it showed that even if he'd obtained a strand of Genesis energy's true secrets, he hadn't gained full control over it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have to wait for Xianxia's arrival, and he could just charge out from the Tao Terra Firma because no one in the world would be able to resist him anymore. Xianxia was clearly aware of it, so he didn't panic at all. The true reason that he was visibly moved was because strands of dazzling light frequently flickered within the chaotic cloud. The aura of every single strand of light was extremely unique. They carried the aura of civilizations, the aura of the world, and all sorts of vast and complicated forms of energy. If one looked carefully, those strands of dazzling light were actually numerous planes and worlds. The netherworld, mortal dimension, immortal dimension, ancient god domain, god rank mountain, the forgotten grounds of chaos. All of them were actually reflected there. It was even to the extent that she could see the 3,000 large worlds, myriad of minor worlds, and even the landscape and countless inhabitants within the mortal dimensions. That was the main reason why she had been visibly moved just now. A chaotic cloud encompassed the entire universe within it, and it seemed to reflect everything within the world. Moreover, the chaotic cloud was densely covered by the clear and lustrous order of God's Bane Heaven. Does this mean that it isn't just a chaotic cloud which I'm looking at, and it's the true appearance of the entire world? Sure enough, the sovereign sex master gave him the answer. You're not mistaken. This is the world created by the chaos of the three dimensions. After I took control of the order of the Heaven Tao, the entire world fell into my control as well. He paused for a moment before he suddenly smiled. If you think it's an illusion, then I can send down a calamity and erase the immortal dimension from existence. Xianxia's eyes couldn't help but narrow, and then he said, Erase the immortal dimension? I think you probably wouldn't do that. The sovereign sex master said, Oh, you don't believe me? Xianxia said, I don't. You really don't? Indeed. Their conversation seemed extremely laughable and immature in the eyes of anyone else, and it was like an argument between two children. But it was obvious that both the sovereign sex master and Xianxia weren't joking. Their tones were serious, calm, and direct. They knew that deception was useless now, and an actual argument was especially laughable. After all, both of them had attained a supreme state which was beyond imagination. Under such circumstances, such a competition between them was an extremely real competition of the Tao heart and strength. If they were to continue trying to use schemes and tricks against each other, it would prove that their opponent was too weak and inferior. Indeed, I can accomplish it, but I won't. After all, that's not all I need. The sovereign sex voice was still indistinct as before, and it reverberated through the boundless world here and was filled with a supremely dignified tone. At this point, he still hadn't revealed himself. But Xianxia seemed to pay no attention to that, and he just stared at the chaotic clouds in silence for a long time before he said, "My master and the others have been trapped inside there?" The sovereign sex master answered frankly, "Yes." Xianxia nodded, and then he asked, "Then what do you intend to do with me?" The sovereign sex master roared with laughter, and his voice didn't have any fluctuations of emotion. "Little fellow, you've lost since the moment you arrived at the Tao Terra Firma. Offering up your life to me right now is equivalent to completing your mission. That's the final opportunity that I'll give you." Xianxia's brows raised. "What if I don't agree?" The sovereign sex master spoke indifferently. "It's very simple. You'll experience the most unbearable pain in this world. You'll realize that being able to obtain release right now is a very fortunate thing." Xianxia suddenly chuckled and said, "In the end, it's all just threats. If you really had the ability to kill me right now, then you would have probably attacked a long time ago. Yet you just happened to waste your breath for so long. It really makes me look down on you a little." The sovereign sex master remained unaffected and said, "You're right. Your current Tao heart is perfect and flawless, so it really is very difficult to kill you right away. But you'll soon understand that your fate was predetermined." Xianxia said calmly, "Please do try." The sovereign sex master smiled and said, "As you wish." As he spoke, the chaotic cloud suddenly roiled, and then a boundless path that seemed like the pathway to hell had split open on the chaotic cloud. "Your master and the others are trapped in there. You're unable to change their fate if you choose to rescue them or not. However, you'll definitely refuse to believe me. Since it's like that, are you willing to head in there and give it a try?" The sovereign sex master's voice resounded once more, and it was like he was talking about an extremely ordinary thing that didn't even cause a ripple to arise in his voice. "This is your plan?" asked Xianxia. "Yes." The sovereign sex master's answer was extremely frank. "What would you do if I refused to head in there?" said Xianxia. "I'd switch to another plan until I create a flaw in your Tao heart, and that would also mean that Fuxi and the others will definitely die." The sovereign sex master spoke indifferently. This wasn't a scheme but an open and unavoidable plan. Regardless of whether Xianxia agreed, he'd fallen into the sovereign sex master's grasps since the beginning. Since a very long time ago, Xianxia had always been extremely against the feeling of being in the grasps of another and being unable to decide his own fate. It was the same right now. So, a wisp of indescribable killing intent surged out from Xianxia's heart at this moment. "Good. Ripples have started to appear in your Tao heart." The sovereign sex master seemed to have noticed the changes in Xianxia's heart, and he sighed with satisfaction. Xianxia suddenly asked, "Do you know why I came here this time? To kill me and rescue Fuxi and the others? Or take control of the energy of Genesis?" said the sovereign sex master. "No, I won't allow you to die because that would be like letting you off too easily. I came here to tell you that the thing I've hated most since I was young has always been being schemed against by others." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia's figure flashed, and he traveled through the passageway in the chaotic cloud and vanished. On the other hand, the pathway closed up as well. What an immature little fellow. Since he possessed the complete river diagram, I thought he'd seen through the principles of life, death, and the unreal, and he would understand that only emotionlessness leads to eternality. Unexpectedly, he's still unable to escape the cage that is the Tao heart. The sovereign sex master's light-hearted sigh resounded within that boundlessly vast area. The Tao heart? That was just a lie. If one intended to attain eternality, then what good would the Tao heart do? Boundless emptiness was the true secret of Genesis. The scene before his eyes flashed, and then Xianxia arrived at a starry sky. A myriad of stars were circulating incessantly in cycles along various different pathways. The pathways were like the marks of the Grand Tao. Some were long, some were short, some were winding, some were straight like a spear, and some went around in circles. They seemed like the profound pathways of various talisman markings. Xianxia felt like he could see an invisible hand utilizing the world as the talisman paper, the myriad of stars as the talisman brush, and a talisman crafting technique which was beyond imagination to fully display the profundities of the Grand Tao. It was indescribably profound. Such a scene was so familiar to Xianxia. It was familiar to the point that he felt like he'd returned to the time when he was still young. At that time, he was a jinx that everyone throughout Pine Mist City ridiculed, and even if he cultivated painstakingly, his cultivation wasn't able to break through at all. All of that continued until one quiet night when he noticed a jade pendant within a longevity lock he possessed, and he entered the mysterious manor. At that moment, it was like an unseen force had brought about a change in his destiny, and it had opened up the door to a dreamlike and unreal world to Xianxia. He saw the exact same sight of a myriad of stars which covered the sky for the very first time behind that door, and he saw Fuxi's divine statue there as well. When he thought about it now, he realized that he'd actually become a disciple of Oracle Mountain and a disciple of Fuxi since that moment. Fuxi. This name had appeared countless times throughout Xianxi's life, since he was young until now. Since Pine Mist City, the Southern Territory, the Darchu Dynasty, the Ancient Battlefield, the Dark Reverie, the Immortal Dimension, the Ancient God Domain, and the Tao Terra Firma at this very moment. The laughable thing was that even until this very moment, and even until he'd stepped foot into the Tao Lord realm, fused with the complete river diagram, and seen through the secrets of the ultimate path, Xianxia had never met Fuxi. They were master and disciple, yet they'd never met each other. So such a relationship was truly inconceivable. However, Xianxia was clearly aware that his master, Fuxi, had a profound impact on his life. Fuxi had practically always existed behind him throughout his life and his path of cultivation. Fuxi, Wuxia, Liyang, Jiyu, Dishun, Wendaozhen. All of them were members of Oracle Mountain, and they seemed like the personification of Fuxi, and all of them carried a brand that Fuxi had left behind. Even the technique Xianxia cultivated, the divine talismans he possessed. All of them carried traces of Fuxi. They'd never met, yet Fuxi was everywhere. When he looked back upon it all right now, Xianxia was very clearly aware that his master, Fuxi, had become a form of mental support in the bottom of his heart. It was Fuxi's manner that he'd inherited and allowed him to obtain all sorts of techniques. It was a form of influence that was completely soundless and imperceptibly, and it had changed Xianxi's life by too much. It was exactly like a cycle of cause and effect right now, because of everything Fuxi had done for him. Even though he was very well aware that the Tao Terra was dangerous, Xianxia had still traveled here resolutely because he wanted to rescue this master of his that he'd never met. This was the effect. Cause and effect gave rise to each other, and they were like a cycle in destiny which couldn't be eliminated. Xianxia had seen through all of it, so even if he knew that the sovereign sect had set up this trap and knew that it was extremely dangerous, Xianxia had still chosen to enter it. Xianxia was very clearly aware that the sovereign sect's master had done this because he wanted to use this to shake and destroy his Tao heart. Loyalty and emotions were Xianxi's weakest flaw in his Tao heart. Now, the sovereign sect's master had trapped Fuxi and the others here, and their fate had escaped their control a very long time ago. It was just as the sovereign sect's master had said, the outcome would be the same regardless of whether Xianxia saved them. Since Fuxi was trapped, it was impossible for Xianxia to stand by idly because it would definitely cause his Tao heart to become unstable. If Fuxi was killed, then it would be impossible for Xianxia to remain unaffected, and he would suffer a blow to his Tao heart as well. So, regardless of whether Xianxia tried to save Fuxi or not, it didn't make much of a difference to the sovereign sect's master. It was like a dead end, and it was one that targeted Xianxi's loyalty and emotions. Why come when you know that you shouldn't? A sigh resounded and reverberated through the myriad of stars. Xianxi's gaze focused on the starry sky in the distance. He saw an old and simple old man in linen clothes who was seated cross-legged above the stars while having his legs bared. His white hair hung down loosely behind him as he sat above the stars and looked down from above while emanating an indescribably vast and mysterious aura. Fuxi. She had always utilized Fuxi's divine statue to temper his soul since a very long time ago. So, how could he be unable to recognize that person he saw in the distance as his master whom he'd never met in the past? At this moment, Fuxi was seated cross-legged there while the myriad of stars circulated around him. He was mighty and solemn, and the gaze he shot at she revealed a wisp of complicated emotions which included a sense of loss and gratification. It really is Fuxi. She was sure that it wasn't a brand or a strand of will, and it was Fuxi's real body there. In merely an instant, a strand of indescribable excitement surged into his heart, and it caused Xi's eyes to seem deep yet bright. Disciple Shi greets master. As he spoke, Shi bowed on the spot with a solemn and serious expression. He knelt 3 times and bowed 9 times. That was the most solemn method of greeting in a sect, and only one's master could receive such treatment. Moreover, it was the first time Shi had done it in his entire lifetime. However, Fuxi sighed when he saw Shi do that. I thought that you'd seen through the sovereign sect's master's intentions and wouldn't rashly enter his trap. Unexpectedly, he couldn't help but shake his head as he spoke, and a wisp of a disappointment appeared on his aged face. He seemed to be flagging with interest and extremely disappointed in Shi's actions. Shi stood up, pursed his lips, and remained silent. He understood what Fuxi meant. Logically speaking, since he was aware that it was impossible to save such a hopeless situation, he should abandon it decisively and seek another path. But Shi wasn't able to do that. Or perhaps it could be said that he'd stopped considering everything else once he was sure that Fuxi had been trapped. Do you know that I, Nuwa, and all the others had no chance of survival once he was suppressed and trapped here? So why couldn't you see through the true nature of it all? Asked Fuxi. I can, but I can't go against my own Tao heart. Shi spoke calmly. Fuxi had a complicated expression on his face as he sighed once more with emotion. Then are you aware that your actions will bring harm to yourself and all your loved ones? Shi spoke frankly. I understand. Once the sovereign sect's master accomplishes his wish and takes control of the energy of Genesis, then the entire world and all the living beings within it would be at his mercy. There would be no one in the world who's capable of going against him. He'll be the one and only supreme overlord that reigns over the world for eternity. Fuxi was stunned. He stared at Shi for a long time before he said, Then why have you acted like this? Shi fell silent for a short while before he answered with a question. Master, may I ask what you think the ultimate path is? Fuxi frowned before he said, The ultimate path is Genesis. That's the common view that all of us who've been able to enter the Tao Terra Firma possess. Even the sovereign sect's master has always been trying to take control of it. Shi nodded and said, Yes, Genesis really can be considered to be the secret of the ultimate path. However, I think that Genesis isn't the complete secret of the ultimate path. A wisp of surprise flashed through Fuxi's eyes. What do you mean? When he heard this, Shi raised his head to gaze at Fuxi, who was far away in the distant starry sky, and a wisp of a complicated expression faintly surged into his eyes. Shi fell silent for a long time before he actually sighed. Master, you'll be able to find out once I've defeated the sovereign sect's master. As he spoke, Shi strode towards the starry sky, and then he suddenly appeared 300 m before Fuxi. Fuxi frowned while a wisp of a puzzled expression appeared on his aged face. He seemed to be unable to figure out Shi's intentions. Master, you'll understand when you wake up. Shi's expression grew even more complicated. He flicked his sleeve, and then the myriad of stars circulating in the surroundings suddenly exploded apart and vanished into nothingness. At the same time, Fuxi seemed as if he'd been struck by lightning. His expression changed while he spoke with fury and disappointment. You! He hadn't even finished speaking when his figure slumped down. There was no more vitality left within him. He transformed into an icy cold corpse. Xianxia stepped forward, knelt on the ground, and he said, "Master, forgive me for the offense." His voice was low and carried a trace of indescribable bitterness. His handsome face was covered in an extremely complicated expression, while a trace of scarlet-red blood suddenly flowed out from the corner of his lips yet vanished almost immediately. "You killed you, master?" Suddenly, a clear shout that carried an extraordinary dignified tone resounded. Suddenly, 5-colored divine radiance appeared far away in the distance, and then it stretched across the sky as it approached. There was a boundlessly pure and graceful figure standing on the 5-colored divine radiance. As she stood there casually, she seemed like a divine being that made all living beings prostrate themselves in worship wherever she went. "Nuwa." She stood up, and he instantly determined her identity upon noticing the boundlessly pure aura she emanated. "No, I'm saving my master." She shook his head while a wisp of melancholy, which couldn't be eliminated, covered the space between his brows. "Saving him? If you wanted to save him, then you shouldn't have come here. Now, not only do you refuse to think of a way to escape, you've even murdered your master. How wicked of you!" Nuwa's voice surged like the rumbling of the Tao, and she was extremely furious. Xianxia's countenance became slightly pale, while one could clearly notice that he was struggling and dazed from the expression in his deep black eyes. A short while passed before he said, "Senior Master said that all of you've seen through life and death." Nuwa said coldly, "That doesn't mean that you can kill your master." She shook his head. "You've misunderstood what I'm trying to say. I just want to ask you if you can hand your life over to me, if I'm able to defeat the sovereign sex master." Dazzling and vast 5-colored divine radiance flowed through Nuwa's body, and it illuminated the entire surroundings. But in the end, she seemed to have thought of something and said, "Tell me where you're getting your confidence from?" She said, "I can't tell you that." Nuwa fell silent. Swoosh! Right at this moment, Xi's figure suddenly vanished into thin air. In the next moment, he appeared before Nuwa, and then he struck her neck lightly. Nuwa's body slumped down while the vitality within her vanished. Xi's figure swayed after he did this, and his countenance grew even pale. He couldn't help but rub his forehead while he seemed to be forcefully suppressing something. In the end, he still couldn't help but cough out a mouthful of blood. She couldn't help but laugh bitterly and sigh. As expected, loyalty and emotions really are the most lethal. I'm clearly aware that my actions are correct, but I'm unable to avoid the condemnation of my Tao heart. Fuxi was very strong, inconceivably strong. Nuwa was equally strong as well. Both of them were ancient figures who possessed extraordinary ability. They were existences who reigned supreme throughout the world and rarely met their match. Moreover, there were innumerable legends about them throughout the world. They were like epics that could move one to tears and joy, and they were filled with eternal radiance. This was no exaggeration because it was common knowledge that only a few throughout history could rival their strengths. Yet now, these two supreme existences had been instantly crushed by Xianxia, and they hadn't been able to resist at all. If cultivators of the outside world were to have witnessed such scenes, they would definitely not believe it. But only Xianxia was clearly aware of the price that he'd paid to kill them. At the very least, his perfect and firm Tao heart was still trembling, and he wasn't able to regain his calm in a short period of time. It was even to the extent that his efforts to calm the trembling of his Tao heart had caused him to be affected, and his entire body suffered the backlash of it. It even caused his countenance to turn pale and cough up blood without end. Existences at Xianxia's realm of cultivation had long since abandoned every other external factor. They possessed mighty and supreme strength that could rival the forces of nature, and even the heavens couldn't do anything to them. Such a realm of cultivation was the ultimate. The test of the ultimate was the Tao heart. As it was said, the grand Tao was without shape, without name, and without principle. The bigoted would take the heavens as the Tao, the gods as the Tao, and the laws as the Tao. However, what was there beyond the heavens, beyond the gods, and beyond the laws? The Tao actually didn't exist in the heavens, the earth, the gods, or the laws. It was hidden within the Tao heart alone. If the heart was certain, then all things would be the Tao. Where the heart looked, the universe's boundless regions and endless expanses of the universe would all just be a speck of sand. As it was said, even the smallest speck of sand was actually like a world. When the Tao heart had comprehended such profundities, it would be able to reflect the universe, see through the heaven Tao, and bear eternal might. That was the ultimate path. At that time, a single thought would cause the entire cosmos to be unable to put a veil over one's eyes, the myriad of Taos to be unable to invade the heart, and one would be capable of creating worlds, refining universes, giving life to countless living beings, and formed a myriad of Taos. Such ability was no different than the ability possessed by the God of creation. That was the might possessed by those who'd comprehended the secrets of the ultimate path. The secret of the ultimate path was Genesis, and the essential point to take control of Genesis was the Tao heart. Thus, the sovereign sex master had arranged such plans merely for the sake of destroying Xianxia's Tao heart. The supreme battle between them had begun while revolving around the Tao heart. Xianxia's actions of killing Fuxi and Nuwa hadn't gone against his Tao heart, but his Tao heart had still been affected because of his loyalty and emotions. That was unavoidable. At the same time, it was the exact outcome which the sovereign sex master had created such plans for. The only thing which surprised the sovereign sex master was that Xianxia was far more ruthless and decisive than he'd expected. Fuxi and Nuwa had both been suppressed by the sovereign sex master, so he was naturally clearly aware that it would be extremely easy for Xianxia to kill them. That was exactly why the sovereign sex master intended to see if Xianxia would be able to bear to kill them when faced with such a situation. Just the fact that he wondered if Xianxia could bear to kill them showed how terrible its impact on Xianxia's Tao heart would be. After all, regardless of whether Xianxia could bear to kill them or not, it was bound to affect his Tao heart. Before he'd even implemented this plan, the sovereign sex master had prepared his contingencies. If Xianxia couldn't bear to kill them, then there would be conflict and struggling within Xianxia's heart. The longer Xianxia struggled, the greater it would harm his Tao heart. In the end, the sovereign sex master would kill them himself, causing Xianxia to struggle and crumble amidst such a tragedy. If Xianxia were to act against them, then he would be killing his own master. The act of killing his own master was absolutely not something a person like Xianxia who had loyalty branded into his bones could deal with. At that time, Xianxia's Tao heart would definitely be struck with guilt, pain, helplessness, and various other negative emotions. That was the sovereign sex master's plan. The entire plan had been created solely for the sake of destroying Xianxia's Tao heart. At this moment, when he saw Xianxia's countenance turn pale, cough up 2 mouthfuls of blood, and seem to be dazed, struggling, and dejected upon killing Fuxi and Nuwa, the sovereign sex master knew that his plan was working as he'd expected. Now, he just had to wait for a flaw to appear in Xianxia's Tao heart. The sovereign sex master was in no hurry because his plan had just begun, and it was far from completion. So long as Xianxia's Tao heart was being shaken incessantly, then it would collapse sooner or later. Huff! Xianxia let out a long breath of air, and then he sat casually in space. He was in a mysterious area that was boundlessly vast, and he couldn't be bothered to figure out his whereabouts. It was sufficient for him to know that it was an area created within the sovereign sex master's chaotic cloud. Xianxia was sure that the sovereign sex master had definitely clearly witnessed the scenes of him killing Fuxi and Nuwa. It was unavoidable, and Xianxia didn't mind as well. His countenance was still pale while his deep eyes were horrifyingly calm, and his Tao heart was still surging incessantly. How could killing his own master be that simple? Even if he was forced to do it, but if Wu Shuachan, Di Shun, Wen Daozhen, Li Yang, and the others were to find out, then the consequences. Moreover, if Shi Yu and Qing Shui were to find out that he'd killed Nuwa, then what would the consequences of that be? This was the guilt and shame he felt, and it was like lashes from the loyalty and emotions that he possessed. Needless to say, the sovereign sex master's plans were terrifyingly accurate, and his plans would be ever successful just by targeting Xianxia's loyalties and emotions. At the very least, it was ever successful right now. Xianxia's heart couldn't calm down. Xianxia couldn't help but sigh. He knew that the current situation was very disadvantageous to him, but he couldn't only continue on this path. Otherwise, he would lose even more quickly and horribly. If even he lost, then who else could go against the sovereign sex master? Who else could revive Wuxia? Who else could resurrect Fuxi and Yuhua? So, Xianxia had no choice but to continue on this path. Even if he felt uneasy, he had to continue. It wasn't long before a sigh that was filled with sorrow and grief resounded. Why? Yes, why? Xianxia sighed as he raised his eyes, and he saw a large tree that covered the sky was suddenly standing towering extremely far away from him. Its leaves and branches were verdant and strong, and it emanated a myriad of specks of clear radiance that descended down like rain. As it stood towering there, it seemed to extend through both past and present, and it was simply lofty and grand to the extreme. The divine dark parasol tree. All those years ago, while he was at the ancient god domain, the divine dark parasol tree had coincidentally been able to recover its consciousness, and it left its main body to Xianxia while it left in search for the ultimate path. Now it had appeared in the Tao Terra Firma. Obviously, it had succeeded in obtaining the secrets of the ultimate path, but it had been suppressed here just like Fuxi and Yuhua. Couldn't be said to be lucky or unlucky. At the very least, while he should be happy and excited from being reunited with the divine Tao Parasol tree right now, Xianxia wasn't able to feel happy in the slightest. He stood up and looked at the dark parasol tree as he said seriously, "Senior, both of us are saviors, and we've even waded storms together for many years, so you should be clearly aware of my character. If you trust me, then place your life in my hands." The divine dark parasol tree said indifferently, "I'm truly unable to trust you." Xianxia frowned. "What are you worried about?" The divine dark parasol tree said, "You've been too heartless. Since you were even able to kill your own master, I can't avoid worrying if the sovereign sex master has already taken control of you." Xianxia's brows knit together even more tightly. He'd experienced such distrust on numerous occasions in the past, but his heart hurt for no reason when such words were spoken by the divine dark parasol tree, and he felt quite sad. Xianxia sighed. "Why? I naturally have to be careful when facing an enemy like the sovereign sex master." The divine dark parasol tree's voice was still indifferent as before. Xianxia took a deep breath before he said, "But if you don't trust me, then do you have a way to escape this calamity? To be frank, you would have been killing on the spot a very long time ago if it weren't for my help. Since it's like that, then why not take a gamble?" The divine Tao parasol tree fell silent. A trace of uneasiness faintly appeared in Xianxia's heart when he saw this, and then his figure flashed swiftly to the divine dark parasol tree. Right at this instant, the divine dark parasol tree's towering figure that seemed to be holding up the heavens had actually exploded into pieces, and it transformed into powder that dispersed into the surroundings. "I believe." A hoarse and weak voice resounded from it before it died, yet it stopped abruptly as the divine dark parasol tree had perished before it could finish speaking. Xianxia's eyes suddenly opened wide as he stood there on the spot, and an extremely strong feeling of bitterness arose in his heart. I was too late in the end. A stream of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth, and it caused his countenance to grow paler and become faintly translucent. Xianxia just stood there on the spot like a soulless statue. His loyalties and emotions were things that Xianxia really couldn't abandon. It was exactly that which caused him to be unable to control the anger in his heart when the divine dark parasol tree died. He would rather see it die in his hands than watch the sovereign sex master annihilate it. But it had still occurred in the end. Killing Fuxi was murder of the master. Killing Yuhua was murder of a senior. Killing the divine dark parasol tree was murder of a friend. Xianxia's heart was completely empty while he felt indescribably suffocated. Moreover, extreme rage, hatred, guilt, and remorse raged through him like lava, and they were on the verge of exploding. His eyes had become scarlet red like blood while his lips were pressed together tightly. He was on the verge of losing control of himself, and his Tao heart was wailing violently without end and was on the verge of collapse. Xianxia knew that this was exactly what the sovereign sex master wished to see, but he was utterly unable to control his Tao heart. All of it was because of his emotions and the loyalties he had, At this moment, it was like poison that was on the verge of corroding and destroying Xianxia's Dao heart. Was I mistaken? Xianxia gritted his teeth. If my loyalties and emotions were poison, then what was the point of staying true to my heart? Could it be that my heart was mistaken? No. Xianxia suddenly raised his head, and his blood-red eyes swept the surroundings as he spoke word by word. One day, I'll make an emotionless bastard like you suffer such torture as well. Living will be worse than dying to you. The hatred in his voice surged like an ocean and was simply on the verge of overturning the world. His voice that was filled with boundless hatred reverberated through the surroundings, yet he received no reply. However, numerous Paramitha flowers that were crimson-red like fire formed a path illuminated by fire from extremely far away, and it was charging towards him. Paramitha, the supreme grand Tao that was comprehended by the first Netherworld Emperor. I believe you. A heavy and deep voice resounded from the path covered in Paramitha flowers, and then an indistinct and mighty fiery red figure appeared there. He seemed like he was walking through life and death, and his figure was only faintly visible. However, Xianxia was very clearly aware that it was the first Netherworld Emperor and one of the saviors of this era. Just these few words caused Xianxia's heart to feel warm, and his unstable mental state, which was filled with accumulated gloom, had calmed down greatly. Xianxia took a deep breath and bowed in a serious manner. Thank you. However, he hadn't even been able to finish speaking when the path illuminated by fire suddenly collapsed. And then the Paramitha flowers seemed like flames which had been extinguished as they vanished into nothingness. At the same time, the indistinct and mighty figure of the first Netherworld Emperor had vanished before Xianxia's eyes. Xianxia's figure stiffened on the spot and maintained that bowing state. It was like a tsunami was raging through his heart right now, and it rumbled and shook him intensely. He was filled with indescribable hatred. It was like a roller coaster of emotions. Hope had arrived yet was lost almost right away. Light had just descended yet it was immediately drowned out by darkness. His Tao heart experienced such a storm as well, and it was on the verge of collapse. Pooh! Xianxia coughed up another mouthful of blood. The sovereign sex master was imperceptibly destroying his Tao heart with extremely unpredictable methods. He wasn't in any rush to kill Fuxi and the others, but he would eliminate their existence at the best moment. Just like he'd done right now. It was cruel and terrifying. Blood almost dripped down from Xianxia's eyes while his countenance was ghastly pale, and he'd clenched his fists tightly. Besides that, he could see nothing but blood red with his eyes. His Tao heart was suffering torment and devastation. At this moment, loyalty and emotions could be described as blades that were sharp to an irresistible degree, and they were extremely heavy like mountains to the point that they were impossible to ward off. A short while later, a muddy and boundless sea of misery appeared in the distance. Oblivion. It was the supreme grand Tao that the second Netherworld Emperor had comprehended. The path seems simple yet isn't. Don't lose yourself. As soon as he finished speaking, the second Netherworld Emperor had been wiped out from existence as well. Xianxia's countenance grew as pale as wax. After that, the Antexalt arrived here, and he left behind the words, "The Grand Tao is a path toward simplicity." The heart is never insignificant, before he was annihilated as well. The master of the Manchu period appeared, and he just nodded slightly to Xianxia while remaining silent. The dean of the Tao Institute, Lu Xinji, arrived. He just sighed with emotion, and then smiled lightheartedly. Every single one of them was a supreme figure who practically only existed in legends and epics, yet all of them had been annihilated before Xianxia in less than 10 minutes. Xianxia coughed up blood incessantly while his countenance grew paler and paler. He knew that it was bound to be a dead end, yet he hadn't imagined that it would be so brutal and miserable. He was feeling guilt, remorse, hatred, and rage, yet he was also struggling, dazed, and conflicted. All of this was because of the emotions and loyalties he possessed. Moreover, as he watched these legendary figures die before him and either provide him with instruction, encouragement, or consolation, it made Xianxia feel like a heavy responsibility that practically suffocated him had been placed on his shoulders. Responsibility was sometimes like pressure that was impossible to endure, and it could cause one's Tao heart to collapse. Just like this very moment, she didn't even dare to think of the consequences if he were to fail. "You've lost." The sovereign sex master's indistinct voice resounded amidst the deathly silent atmosphere, and it was emotionless and cold. "Do you remember what I told you earlier? If you didn't agree to the opportunity that I gave you, then you were bound to experience the most unbearable pain in this world." At this moment, Xianxia's clothes were dyed red with blood while his countenance was ghastly pale, and his blood-red eyes seemed to have lost all their vitality. They were empty and lifeless. "I haven't collapsed yet." She spoke indifferently in a calm and hoarse voice. "Yes, but your Tao heart is only a trace away from collapse." The sovereign sex master grinned as he said, "Most importantly, my plan is only halfway done. Next, I'll allow you to watch the deaths of your friends and loved ones. You must be sure to have a good look because they'll die in all sorts of different ways." Swish! The starry sky around them suddenly transformed into ripples and vanished. She felt something flash before his eyes, and then he'd returned to the boundlessly vast and empty Tao terra firma. The enormous, chaotic cloud wasn't too far away, while countless clear and glistening strands of the order of the heaven Tao surrounded the chaotic cloud. Besides that, the chaotic cloud itself had the three dimensions ancient god domain, god rank mountain, and various other worlds and planes reflected on it. The chaotic cloud suddenly roiled before a world was revealed. It was the ancient god domain, and it wasn't long before Oracle Mountain appeared there. When gazing at Oracle Mountain from here, it was like looking down at it from the 9 heavens. He could see the entire mountain clearly, and even the restrictions which surrounded it couldn't escape such detection. It was the energy of order which belonged to Godsbane heaven and covered the entire ancient god domain. Now, it was in the sovereign sex master's control, so he was naturally able to view everything on Oracle Mountain with ease. Thump! A very bad feeling surged from Xianxia's heart. The sovereign sex master spoke once more. "Look, Oracle Mountain is right before your eyes. So long as I will it, I can send heavenly wrath down and obliterate Oracle Mountain. Or I can control the energy of order to take control of the lives of every single living being on Oracle Mountain." As if it was done to prove his words, a bolt of tribulation lightning descended like a black dragon and blasted against Oracle Mountain, and it forcefully blasted away almost half of the entire mountain. After that, exclaims resounded throughout Oracle Mountain as numerous figures appeared. These figures included Di Shun, Wen Daozhen, Li Yan, Tai Yunhai, Senior White, and Zhen Luqing. Xi's face instantly became livid. His blood-red eyes seemed as if they were burning with rage while his chest rose and fell rapidly. "So long as I will it, Di Shun can perish at Wen Daozhen's hands, or Wen Daozhen can lose his life from qi deviation. Oh, I remember that little girl called Zhen Luqing is your Tao companion, right? I can let you choose how she dies. For example, being humiliated and insulted to death. Or I can take away her rights as a god, place her in the mortal world, and make her endure endless torment." The sovereign sex master's voice carried indifference from possessing absolute control. "Of course, if you aren't willing to accept all of that, then I can satisfy your wish as well, and I'll start from your friends and loved ones at Tao Emperor Academy. For example, I can make your descendants kill each other. I can make your clone annihilate all your wives, friends, and descendants." His voice was extremely cold and emotionless, and it was like the voice of the devil. Blood was dripping from Xianxi's eyes, while his entire body couldn't help but shiver. He was biting his teeth together tightly, and his livid face had faintly become ferocious and warped. He knew that since the sovereign sex master dared to say all of that, the sovereign sex master would dare to put his words into action. In other words, the sovereign sex master would never joke about such things. After all, he'd always done things without any restraint, and he'd always been a cold and merciless person. Pooh! She coughed up another mouthful of blood. This time, he wasn't able to endure it any longer, and he slumped to the ground while his entire body seemed to be on the verge of collapse and obliteration. "Take it." She seemed to have given up. His blood-red eyes were empty and lifeless. It was like he'd lost his soul, and his Tao heart had collapsed completely at this moment. As soon as his Tao heart was destroyed, even the chaos within his body, the strength within him, and his soul had all been affected and suddenly started collapsing. In merely an instant, Xianxia seemed as if he'd lost all vitality. He was dispirited to the extreme and seemed to be on the verge of death. "Little fellow, so you admitted defeat yourself in the end." A figure had suddenly appeared by Xianxia's side. He wore black clothed with wide sleeves, and his entire body was indistinct as if he were in between reality and illusion. He seemed like he was omnipresent. He stretched out his hand and grabbed, and then 9 obscure and mysterious rays of light were seized from within Xianxia and fell into his grasp. "The river diagram. This is the river diagram. Ha ha ha. After countless years of planning, I've finally succeeded now. With it in my possession, the Genesis energy in the Tao terra firma will definitely be mine as well. At that time, the myriad of Taos in the world, the source of chaos, all living beings. Everything will submit beneath my feet. I'm bound to be the one and only eternal and supreme existence since the chaos had been split apart." At this moment, the sovereign sex master seemed to be especially excited. A wisp of light suddenly shot out from his eyes, and it was peerlessly dazzling to the point it was on the verge of illuminating the world. However, his voice was still indifferent and emotionless. There were no fluctuations of emotion within him at all, and it made him seem extremely terrifying. At this moment, Xianxia was lying on the ground. His blood-red eyes were opened wide, empty, and deathly still. The vitality throughout his body had vanished while countless cracks had appeared throughout his body. He seemed to be on the verge of collapse and vanishing. The home of the Tao? The sovereign sex master swallowed the entire river diagram into his body. In merely a short moment, a mysterious, obscure, and powerful aura surged out from within him, and he seemed to have fused with the entire Tao terra firma. "It's within me," the sovereign sex master roared with laughter, and it resounded throughout the boundlessly large and empty Tao terra firma. At this instant, he seemed to have become an eternal overlord. "The home of the Tao? It's within me." The entire Tao terra firma started to tremble while an invisible force surged towards the sovereign sex master like an ocean. At this moment, Xianxia's eyes were empty while his body was growing even more icy cold. "Little fellow, samsara is within my heart, and I've taken control of both Genesis and the ultimate path. The Tao terra firma, the chaos of the 3 dimensions, and the myriad of worlds in the cosmos are all beneath my feet now." The sovereign sex master looked down at Xianxia, who was lying there, and spoke indifferently. "Your duty is complete, so go to eternal rest." He flicked his sleeve, and then Xianxia's figure, which was on the verge of collapse, suddenly transformed into ash and vanished completely. At this point of time, the sovereign sex master had finally relaxed, and he was filled with complacency and self-satisfaction as he strode through the Tao terra firma. This was his ultimate path. He attained the Tao through emotionlessness, severed his own Tao heart, seized control over samsara, took control of Genesis, and ruled over the world. But in just a short moment, a trace of wonder suddenly arose in his heart because he kept having the feeling that he lacked something. Is the end of the ultimate path really just like this? I've obtained everything I've sought throughout my lifetime, but it seems like can't make me feel any anticipation or wild joy. Why is that so? Did you really think that taking control of Genesis would be the most intrinsic secret of the ultimate path? A calm and indifferent voice suddenly resounded throughout the Tao terra firma. In merely an instant, the sovereign sex master's eyes narrowed. That voice was so familiar that it caused the sovereign sex master's heart to jerk. But he recovered almost immediately and swept the surroundings with his gaze. In the innumerable years of the past, he'd set up countless schemes, and every single one of them could be considered to have been perfect and without the slightest flaw. The chaotic divine Lotus's death was his doing. Chun Lingjuan's ability to smoothly seize the first river diagram fragment from Godrank Mountain had similarly been because of him pulling the strings from the shadows. Chun Lingjuan's reincarnations, Xianxia's birth, and even until this very moment, it could be said that everything had been within his control. Even if many unexpected events had appeared throughout the way, it still hadn't been able to pose any obstruction to the development of his plan. Just like this very moment, Fuxi, Nuwa, and all the others had been killed while the complete river diagram, Genesis energy, and even the Tao terra firma had fallen smoothly into his grasps. Could be said that he'd truly realized his path at this moment. The heavens, the grand Tao, and all the living beings in the world, all of them had submitted beneath his feet, and he'd become the one and only supreme and eternal ruler. This indirectly proved how terrifying the sovereign sex master's methods were, and he even possessed a form of absolute control towards everything without ever making a mistake. Yet now, Xianxia, whose Tao heart had been destroyed and perished right before his eyes, had actually spoken once more. Such an unexpected event was something that was beyond the sovereign sex master's expectations. However, he didn't fall into panic. After all, it was just an unexpected event, and all he had to do was exterminate it. The sovereign sex master was filled with confidence towards him. He'd become the ruler of the Tao terra firma, and he'd grasped the energy of Genesis and the ultimate path. So all living beings in the world were like ants before him. However, his eyes narrowed after just an instant passed. Even with the terrifying consciousness he possessed right now, he was actually unable to locate the source of that voice. That was another unexpected event, and it was absolutely intolerable to someone like the sovereign sex master, who's taken every conceivable possibility into account and possessed absolute control over everything. Humph! This cold grunt was like the display of displeasure from a supreme ruler, and the entire boundlessly vast and empty Tao terra firma was suddenly thrown into disorder. Terrifying energy surged like a storm through every single inch of space here. It was the strength of an overlord, a supreme force that was the product of Genesis and the ultimate path being fused together. Even if Fuxi and Nuwa were brought back into the world now, then would still find it impossible to resist. However, the sovereign sex master was still unable to detect any traces of Xianxia. This caused his countenance to grow even more indifferent, because he refused to believe that all of that was just him hearing things. But he was puzzled because he'd clearly eliminated Xianxia. So why could Xianxia still speak? Is he still not dead? The sovereign sex master frowned without end, and a trace of detest had arisen in his heart towards such an unexpected event that showed faint signs of escaping his control. He stopped searching, and he just fell silent for a while before he spoke indifferently. As far as I'm concerned, the intrinsic secret of the ultimate path is Genesis, and the complete river diagram is required to take control of Genesis. I possess all of that now, so why should bother about the doubt of a fledgling child like you? No one answered him. The Tao terra firma was deathly silent, and only the sovereign sex master stood there. That feeling of the situation escaping his control grew even stronger when no one answered him, and it made his face grow even more indifferent. The sovereign sex master took a deep breath before issuing a command in his heart. The chaotic cloud appeared once more, and then a myriad of clear and glistening divine chains of order covered the chaotic world around him. Moreover, the myriad of worlds throughout the cosmos were reflected within the chaotic cloud. In next to no time, a ball of light shot out from within it and revealed the image of the 4,900 continents throughout the immortal dimension. The sovereign sex master seemed to have reclaimed his confidence and arrogance upon seeing this, and he spoke slowly. Little fellow, don't blame me for obliterating the entire immortal dimension if you still refuse to show yourself. Once it's destroyed, Tao Emperor Academy will definitely be obliterated along with it, and those friends and loved ones of yours in Tao Emperor Academy would. Bang! He hadn't even finished speaking when the ball of light which represented the immortal dimension exploded into pieces, and it had actually been completely obliterated. From the beginning until the end, the sovereign sex master had actually been unable to stop it all. It was even to the extent that he hadn't even been able to react. In an instant, his pupils constricted while the feeling that everything was escaping his control grew even clearer. He was finally sure that this was no simple unexpected event, and it had even surpassed the scope of his control. But I've severed my Tao heart, seized control over samsara, taken control of Genesis, and rule over the world now. Is there even anything that I can't control? Suddenly, the sovereign sex master recalled that dazed feeling he had when he'd just taken control of Genesis energy and the Tao Terra Firma. He'd felt like he'd lacked something. Could it be that taking control of the Genesis energy in the Tao Terra Firma is still not the true end? As soon as such a thought appeared in his mind, the sovereign sex master immediately erased it. That's impossible. The worlds throughout the cosmos and all the living beings that inhabit it were born from the chaos of the three dimensions. The past and current eras were similarly from the chaos of the three dimensions. The chaos of the three dimensions came from within the Tao Terra Firma. So, this means that the Tao Terra Firma is the source of everything in the world. This is definitely the place where everything began. So long as I've taken control of it, it's equivalent to taking full control of the secrets of the ultimate path, and I've become the one and only supreme ruler. I'm absolutely not mistaken. The sovereign sex master had schemed and planned for countless years in order to accomplish everything he had not. So how could he not be aware of the secrets of the ultimate path? But what about everything that just occurred? He wasn't able to figure it out, and the thing that puzzled him the most was that if it was really Xianxia who did that just now, then why had Xianxia obliterated the immortal dimension in such a decisive manner? After all, there were countless living beings throughout the 4,900 continents of the immortal dimension, and Tao Emperor Academy even housed numerous loved ones and friends of Xianxia's. Yet now he'd destroyed it decisively. So, it made the sovereign sex master if this was still the same Xianxia who had emotions and loyalty branded into his bones. Suddenly, a wisp of vigilance surged into the sovereign sex master's heart. What else can you do? Feel free to do everything in your power. Otherwise, once I act, then I'll be fulfilling my promise from before. Xianxia's calm and indifferent voice resounded once more. His promise was that he wanted living to be worse than death for the sovereign sex master. He'd promised to make the sovereign sex master suffer eternal torment, which was similar torment he'd experienced earlier. The sovereign sex master fell silent for a short while before he finally said, "How did you accomplish this?" He suddenly noticed that even if he possessed the strength of the one and only supreme ruler, he was actually helpless against this situation when he couldn't locate Xianxia. At this moment, Xianxia had even disregarded his loved ones and friends, and he'd even destroyed the immortal dimension himself, so he seemed to not be burned by his emotions and loyalties anymore. In that way, Xianxia had no more flaws. All of this was definitely bad news for the sovereign sex master who'd just taken control of Genesis energy. But it wasn't sufficient to instill despair in him. The sovereign sex master was confident that so long as Xianxia revealed the slightest mistake and as long as he'd locked onto Xianxia's position, then the only outcome that awaited Xianxia would be death. Where were they? The Tao Terra Firma. The sovereign sex master was the one and only ruler of the Tao Terra Firma. So, he felt that the important matter at hand was to force Xianxia to show himself. "Do you think I would tell you such a secret?" Xianxia's voice resounded, and it allowed the sovereign sex master to instantly confirm that he was absolutely unable to lock onto Xianxia's whereabouts by relying solely on Xianxia's voice. "Do you think that I would really be helpless against you just because you've hidden yourself?" The sovereign sex master suddenly chuckled, and then lightly uttered a single word. "Samsara." In the blink of an eye, nothing changed throughout the Tao Terra Firma, and only a strand of a strange and obscure fluctuation appeared around the chaotic cloud. The immortal dimension which had been destroyed had appeared once more, and it had recovered to its previous state. Moreover, as the energy of samsara arose here, everything was being turned back. The sovereign sex master didn't change at all because he controlled samsara, so it would naturally not affect him at all. According to his estimations, the scene of him destroying Xianxia's corpse would appear in a short moment. However, while that scene had occurred, Xianxia's corpse was nowhere to be seen. How could this be possible? Could it be that someone else besides me can avoid being affected by samsara? The sovereign sex master's eyes narrowed. He was involved in everything which had occurred earlier, but he'd removed every trace of himself from it. However, never had he imagined that Xianxia's corpse was actually not within the cycle of samsara as well. The sovereign sex master fell silent. More and more unexpected events were occurring. All of it had escaped the scope of his control, and it caused him to feel a trace of uneasiness. The sovereign sex master didn't stop. He continued controlling the cycle of samsara and moved back into the past, and the scenes from before appeared as well. In next to no time, he'd gone back to the moment when all of those extraordinary figures were crushed before Xianxia's eyes. But only Xianxia wasn't there in those scenes. This caused a wisp of a gloominess to appear on his face. Samsara was moving backward incessantly. The scenes which had occurred earlier were reappearing, and it wasn't long before the figure of the divine Tao parasol tree had appeared. However, Xianxia was still nowhere to be found. Nuwa's figure appeared, and then Fuxi's figure appeared. No matter how he searched, he was actually unable to find a trace of Xianxia. It was like everything that occurred earlier was a dream or a show that only the sovereign sex master was enjoying by himself. From the beginning until the end, Xianxia didn't exist there at all, and that argument between all of them hadn't occurred. This caused the sovereign sex master's face to grow even more indifferent, solemn, and gloomy. It was really like a dream, but only he was very clearly aware that it was no dream. But he still couldn't figure out how Xianxia had erased his entire existence from the cycle of samsara without leaving even a trace behind. In next to no time, samsara had gone back all the way until the Tao terra firma appeared once more before him. However, it was completely empty. The sovereign sex master remembered that Xianxia had just arrived at the Tao terra firma then, and he'd spoken with Xianxia. In the end, he'd forced Xianxia to enter the area created within the chaotic cloud to meet Fuxi and the others. But now there was nothing here. This caused him to almost be unable to believe his eyes. The sovereign sex master withdrew the energy of samsara, causing all the scenes before him to return to normal and stop going back in time. At this moment, the uneasiness in him grew strong and strong, and the feeling that everything had escaped his control was utterly impossible to accept for him, causing his face to turn extremely gloomy. Why? Why is this happening? I clearly destroyed that kid's Tao heart, took his river diagram, and erased him from existence. How could I be unable to find even a trace of him? He has vanished from both past and present. That's utterly impossible. Wait, I've only looked at the past and present. What happens in the future? The sovereign sex master had a flash of inspiration, and he activated samsara again and started deducing the future. However, merely an instant passed when it felt like lightning had struck his heart. His soul trembled, and he couldn't help but cough up a mouthful of blood. Future. I'm actually unable to see the future. His entire body trembled while terrifying light blazed within his pupils, and it was horrifying to the extreme. He couldn't help but mutter, "What exactly is going on?" His voice carried surprise, bewilderment, and a trace of horror. He wasn't cold and indifferent anymore, and there were ripples of emotion within him. Wait, I've severed the barrier of emotions, and I have no desires or feelings. So why do I feel horror? The sovereign sex master roared loudly while he was finally unable to maintain his calm anymore, and his expression started to change indeterminately. Emotionlessness. It was his path. Once he gained emotion, it was simply like cracking open a rift on his foundation, and it was the worst blow he could ever suffer. Emotions included happiness and anger, sorrow and resentment, love and hate, despair and hope. In the past, the sovereign sex master had used emotionlessness to go against Xianxia's emotions. He'd been ever successful, and he'd used a practically flawless plan to smoothly annihilate Xianxia. Yet now, the sovereign sex master's emotionless heart had started rippling with emotion. Such an unexpected event was something even he was unable to accept. Emotionlessness was what he relied on the most, but his reliance had actually started to crack apart, so it was simply no different than destroying himself. How could this have happened? The sovereign sex master roared furiously, and the entire Tao terra firma fell into disorder. Terrifying Genesis energy swept towards the surroundings and obliterated all the divine chains of order that enveloped the chaotic cloud, and it even blasted the chaotic cloud itself into powder. Moreover, even all the worlds within the chaotic cloud have been obliterated along with it. At this moment, the sovereign sex master was in complete panic and disorder. It was even to the extent that he felt terrified. When someone emotionless like him suddenly aroused emotions within him, it was no different than an alternation between life and death to the sovereign sex master. No one answered him. At this moment, he was like a king that had lost his crown and had been reduced to a beggar in the mortal world. He had no dignity, no arrogance, and had lost that halo of a supreme overlord. All he had was horror, bewilderment, and disorder. He was in such an embarrassing state. His hair had become completely disheveled as he just stood there howling and roaring by himself, yet no one answered him. It was like he was punishing himself. The sovereign sex master was a terrifying existence who possessed supreme wisdom, and his ability was so formidable that he was practically unparalleled throughout the world. It was precisely such extraordinary wisdom which allowed him to possess his current accomplishments, and he'd become the one and only supreme overlord of the world. He could be said to be perfect. It was exactly his formidable ability which made it so that only he schemed against others since the ancient times until now, and others could only be at his mercy. But in the end, did he really have no weaknesses? He did. If loyalty and emotions were Xianxia's burdens, the emotionlessness was the sovereign sex master's weak point. So long as he aroused emotions, then cracks would appear in his foundation. So long as he lost his absolute control over things, then his formidable ability would collapse. That was exactly what was occurring right now. When that uneasiness appeared in his heart and strengthened gradually, it caused the sovereign sex master to feel doubt for the very first time. It was like a poisonous snake that bit him and created a flaw in him. At this moment, this unexpected event which was beyond his control had grown even worse. So the doubt within him had transformed into a torrent that ceaselessly struck, shook, and damaged his will. In the end, he felt a trace of terror and panic, and it was exactly why the path of emotionlessness which he'd perfected had started to be swayed. Xianxia, get the fuck out here. Get out here. The sovereign sex master howled with a livid and savage appearance. He was trying hard to control his emotions yet noticed that he was unable to do so at all. No one answered him at all. Only the sovereign sex master's practically insane voice reverberated through the deathly silent Tao terra firma, and it didn't seem indistinct and completely emotionless as it was before. As if he'd noticed that this was very bad and dangerous, the sovereign sex master fell silent, and then he started gasping rapidly for breath. He was madly deducing a method to escape this predicament because even he knew that his enemy was watching all of this from the shadows. It was even to the extent that he was clearly aware that he was starting to move towards defeat if he didn't start taking control of the situation. It was something that the sovereign sex master couldn't tolerate at all. He'd been planning for countless years and exercising forbearance throughout that time. Now, he'd finally seized control over samsara and Genesis energy, and he'd become the one and only supreme ruler of the world. So, how could he just watch helplessly as he lost everything? Enter samsara. I seek my true self. The eternal shall be my guide to retake Genesis. The cycle of samsara appeared amidst a practically mad roar, and then the sovereign sex master himself entered samsara and instantly returned to the moment when Xianxia had just arrived at the Tao terra firma. On the other hand, the complete river diagram, the Genesis energy, and everything he'd attained upon stepping foot onto the end of the ultimate path had vanished. In other words, the sovereign sex master had completely returned to the moment Xianxia entered the Tao terra firma, and even his consciousness and memories had been changed. It was like this period of time had ceased to exist. That was the price he had to pay for entering samsara himself. Unlike controlling and utilizing samsara, so long as he entered the cycle of samsara while he was within the Tao terra firma, then this price had to be paid. The Tao terra firma could be said to be a path of destiny, and while the sovereign sex master could control it and manipulate the fate of others who were on this path of destiny, he would experience the same treatment if he were to step foot onto it as well. The Tao terra firma was completely empty. It wasn't long before a tall figure appeared here. He wore green clothes and had a handsome appearance. It was Xianxia. Little fellow, you're finally here. An indistinct voice that was filled with a supremely dignified tone resounded as if it was a decree of the heavens. After that, an expanse of chaotic clouds suddenly appeared extremely far away in the distance. The clouds covered the world and were boundlessly vast. Xianxia simply seemed like a drop in the ocean when compared to it. Countless clear and lustrous divine chains of order were like huge dragons that were interweaved around the cloud, and they flowed with the extremely terrifying and supremely dignified aura that belonged solely to the order of the Heaven Tao. The sovereign sex master's voice had come from that expanse of chaotic clouds. Everything was just like it had been. Xianxia stood there on the spot and watched all of this. And then a wisp of a thought-provoking smile appeared on the corners of his mouth when he heard the sovereign sex master's voice that seemed to be eternally emotionless and indifferent. Everything had been turned back to the moment Xianxia had just entered the Tao terra firma. That was samsara. It didn't just alter time and space, even karma, consciousness, and destiny were altered. When he heard the sovereign sex master's cold and indifferent voice resound before him, Xianxia remained silent as if he was thinking about something. A short while later, the sovereign sex master spoke again. Xianxia gazed at the chaotic clouds in the distance and spoke at the exact same time. You're not mistaken. This is the world created by the chaos of the three dimensions. After I took control of the order of the Heaven Tao, the entire world fell into my control as well. It was like two people speaking the same words in different voices. One was cold, indifferent, and filled with majesty, while the other was calm, indifferent, and carefree. However, the words they spoke were exactly alike. Ha! The sovereign sex master clearly noticed that the situation was slightly strange, and he couldn't help but continue. If you think it's an illusion, then I can send down a calamity and erase the immortal dimension from existence. However, Xianxia spoke the same words at practically the exact same moment. At this instant, the sovereign sex master finally noticed that something was off, and he fell silent. On the other hand, Xianxia stood with his hands behind his back while he stared at the chaotic cloud in the distance, and he spoke calmly. Are you very surprised? Indeed. The sovereign sex master spoke frankly. Everything was the same as it had been the first time, but everything which had occurred earlier seemed to have been erased by an invisible hand, causing everything to return to the past. At that time, the sovereign sex master was naturally extremely proud and arrogant. He deliberately and meticulously prepared a plan that was a dead end for Xianxia, and he was just waiting for Xianxia to step into it. But Xianxia's current reaction made him acutely notice that something was off. It was like Xianxia had seen through everything he'd done, and it was like all the secrets and plans within his heart were vividly and completely displayed before Xianxia's eyes. It felt extremely uncomfortable to the sovereign sex master, so he refrained from attacking for now. This is the path. Xianxia spoke calmly, and he gave the sovereign sex master an utterly incomprehensible answer. As if he knew the sovereign sex master would be utterly unable to understand him, he continued. In your opinion, taking control of samsara and Genesis energy is equivalent to becoming the one and only eternal overlord of the entire world. It's not surprising to me that you're aware of that. I would even look down upon you instead if you weren't aware of it all. The sovereign sex master spoke indifferently. Xianxia paid no attention to him and just continued. For the sake of accomplishing that objective, you attained the Tao through emotionlessness, severed your Tao heart, created a plan with no way out for me, and even stopped at nothing to force me to come here. You! The sovereign sex master was slightly visibly moved. He was able to believe that Xianxia was capable of guessing all his plans, but he couldn't believe that Xianxia actually knew that he'd severed his Tao heart. That was his biggest secret. Xianxia paid no attention to all of that, and he just continued. In your opinion, I who possess the complete river diagram am like a stepping stone, and you just have to destroy my Tao heart and seize the river diagram to accomplish your objective. At this moment, the sovereign sex master had fallen silent. He felt like a shadow that was completely exposed beneath the scorching rays of the sun. Nothing could escape the illumination of the sun, and all his secrets were clearly known to Xianxia. Such a feeling was extremely uncomfortable to him, and he was filled with aversion and shock towards all of this. However, He'd restrained the questions in his heart when he thought of that plan which he'd formulated for Xianxia, and he said, "You're right. But so what if you've guessed all of that? Since you've fallen into my plan, then your path has been determined." Xianxia nodded. "Truthfully speaking, you succeeded. Just a while ago, I had no choice but to kill my master, Fuxi, and eliminate Senior Nuwa because of the loyalties and emotions I held. Moreover, you added fuel to the fire and killed the divine Dao Parasol Tree, the first Netherworld Emperor, the second Netherworld Emperor, and many others right before my eyes." Xianxi's voice was calm as a pool of still water as it resounded through the boundlessly vast and empty Dao terra firma. However, the sovereign sex master frowned endlessly when he heard all of this. He was unable to understand all of this. He felt like Xianxia was talking nonsense. "I've been waiting here all along. So when did I ever do all of that? When did Xianxia kill Fuxi and Nuwa? This is all a bunch of nonsense." However, when he saw Xianxi's calm and completely composed expression, he once again experienced that feeling of losing control of the situation. "After that, you took my river diagram and finally took control over Genesis energy. However, that was exactly why I was able to truly grasp my own path." Xianxia wasn't trying to infuriate the sovereign sex master, and he was just describing facts that the sovereign sex master wasn't aware of right now. However, the sovereign sex master's heart fell into slight disorder when he heard all of this. Even though he'd severed his Dao heart, he still had his wisdom. He really wanted to interrupt Xianxia and berate Xianxia for talking absurd nonsense. However, for some unknown reason, his mind told him that she didn't seem to be lying. Such a strange and conflicting feeling caused the sovereign sex master to be unable to restrain himself any longer, and he suddenly showed himself. He wore black clothes with wide sleeves, and he stood casually in front of the chaotic cloud with his hands behind his back. His imposing aura was still extraordinary and boundless, yet his expression was cold and indifferent to a terrifying degree. "What exactly are you trying to say?" He spoke word by word, and every single one of them was filled with killing intent. "Do you still not understand? You lost from the moment I finally grasped my true path." Xianxia spoke casually. "I lost." The sovereign sex master roared with laughter, and his voice didn't carry a shred of emotion. "You think that you can turn the situation around and escape the death trap I've set up for you with just a bunch of fabricated nonsense?" Xianxia didn't speak, and he just flicked with the tip of his finger. A screen of light appeared without a sound, and then numerous scenes flashed through the screen of light and were clearly witnessed by the sovereign sex master. Those scenes included everything Xianxia experienced when he'd entered the Dao terra firma for the first time. It showed him being forced into the chaotic cloud, it showed him killing Fuxi and Nuwa, it showed him watching as the divine dark parasol tree, the first Netherworld Emperor, the second Netherworld Emperor, and numerous other extraordinary figures were obliterated from existence. After that, it showed the sovereign sex master using the immortal dimension to threaten Xianxia into handing over the complete river diagram, and then he fell to the ground and perished. In the beginning, the sovereign sex master remained indifferent towards all of this. He felt that Xianxia had been merely utilizing certain methods to form such illusionary scenes. So, even if they seemed real, they were fake in the end. However, when he saw himself take control of the complete river diagram, seize control of Genesis energy, and attain his position as the one and only supreme overlord of the world, a wisp of surprise couldn't help but appear in his eyes. Isn't that everything I year to accomplish? That was his path. It was the end of the Tao which he'd sought throughout his lifetime. However, it wasn't long before his expression changed slightly. He saw himself suddenly frown within the screen of light, and then seemed to fall into panic and disorder. After that, he saw himself utilize the energy of samsara, yet was still unable to locate Xianxia. Next, he saw himself try to deduce the future, but seemed as if he'd been struck by lightning and coughed up blood repeatedly. In the end, his figure within the screen of light actually seemed to have gone mad, started to howl incessantly, and was overtaken by emotion. That mad, terrified, unwilling, helpless, and resentful appearance of his caused the pupils of the sovereign sex master who stood before Xianxia to constrict, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. How could that have happened? Could all of this be real? The sovereign sex master grew even more indifferent. On the other hand, his figure displayed on the screen of light was shouting similar words. How could this have happened? Xianxia, Xianxia, get the fuck out here. Get out here. His howls were filled with panic and helplessness, and it surged with frustration and resentment. But no one answered him. As he watched all of this which occurred within the screen of light, the sovereign sex master's gaze flickered incessantly while his expression changed indeterminately as well, and then he suddenly flicked his sleeve. Rumble. Terrifying energy swept out with the intention of destroying the screen of light. However, it hadn't even come close to it when it seemed like an insignificant speck of dust that vanished completely. The sovereign sex master's expression couldn't help but change when he witnessed this. Right at this moment, he saw himself within the screen of light seem to risk everything and shout with extreme madness. Enter samsara. I seek my true self. The eternal shall be my guide to retake Genesis. After that, the sovereign sex master's figure within the screen of light vanished, and the complete river diagram and Genesis energy vanished along with him. At this point, the screen of light suddenly vanished. The sovereign sex master stood there on the spot while his expression changed indeterminately, and his cold, indifferent, and emotionless eyes were flickering indeterminately as well. Could all of those scenes have been true? No. If it were true, then how could someone who was dead like Xianxia be able to stand before me? He lost the river diagram, lost samsara, and lost his opportunity to take control of Genesis energy. I erased his existence completely. So why was he still alive? That was clearly fake. His mind told him that it might be true, but he refused to allow such a thing to occur. So, it wasn't long before he eliminated all the distracting thoughts in his mind, and then he gazed at Xianxia and spoke indifferently. That show was very interesting indeed. Was that what you prepared to defeat me with? Xianxia seemed to not feel surprised by this reaction, and he said, the reason I showed you all of that was merely because I want you to feel even more pain when you fail later. The sovereign sex master grunted coldly. Little fellow, I have no time to waste my breath on you. As he spoke, he pointed at the chaotic cloud behind him and said, your master and the others are trapped in there. You're bound to be unable to change their fate regardless of whether you try to save them or not. But you'll definitely not believe me. Since it's like that, then are you willing to head in there and give it a try? There's no need for that. Xianxia flicked his sleeve, and then the chaotic cloud suddenly vanished as if it was swept away by an invisible hand. The sovereign sex master's expression couldn't help but change when he witnessed this scene. You! At the moment the chaotic cloud vanished, he instantly noticed that his control over the Order of the Heaven Tao had actually vanished as well. The Order of the Heaven Tao, which belonged to Godsbane Heaven and covered the three dimensions, the ancient God domain, and the entire cosmos, seemed to have been taken away, and it didn't belong to him any longer. How could the sovereign sex master accept this? That was the key to why he was able to possess his current status and set up such a death trap for Xianxia. Once he lost control of it all, he would be no different than a tiger that had lost its teeth. At this moment, the sovereign sex master really was in panic and disorder. He felt unprecedented terror. It was also at this exact same moment that he suddenly noticed a trace of a crack had actually appeared in his grand Tao of emotionlessness, and he'd aroused fluctuations of emotion. So, he naturally linked all of it to the scenes he'd witnessed on the screen of light just now, and he recalled that he had suffered a similar unexpected event in the scenes displayed by the screen of light. In an instant, his heart shook while the vital blood throughout his body almost started flowing in the opposite direction. He couldn't stop himself from coughing out a mouthful of blood any longer. How exactly did you do all of this? The sovereign sex master gasped rapidly for breath while his vital blood raged throughout his body. He was practically on the verge of madness. That is my path. Xianxia spoke casually. In your opinion, the Tao terra firma is whether both the beginning and the end are. It's where the chaos of the three dimensions was born, and it's the source of all the myriad of Taos in the world. Both in my opinion, this place isn't the end of my path towards the Tao. The sovereign sex master was dazed. It was the first time he felt that he was so slow-witted and muddled because he was actually unable to figure out what Xianxia was trying to say. You severed your Tao heart, so there should have been no one in this world capable of defeating you. But since the moment you took control of the complete river diagram, you indirectly obtained a new Tao heart. The Tao terra firma and the myriad of worlds throughout the world were that Tao heart of yours. Xianxia spoke calmly. At that moment, your Tao heart was like a shell that blinded your eyes. It made you only capable of seeing everything before you, but you were unable to see beyond the Tao terra firma. The sovereign sex master was stunned, and he said, "Is it not the three dimensions and the ancient god domain that are beyond the Tao terra firma?" Xianxia shook his head. "Let me ask you this. How was the Tao terra firma born? How did Genesis energy come to be?" These words were like a thunderclap that shook the sovereign sex master to the point his soul was on the verge of splitting apart and collapsing. "The beginning. I thought Genesis energy was the source of all things, but who would have imagined that there's actually another world beyond the Tao terra firma? Why has this happened? Why was I unable to discern all of that? Liars. All of you are liars. The heavens, the earth, and all things were just a smokescreen. It was all of you. It was all of you that caused this to happen." The sovereign sex master's hair was disheveled, and his face was livid while he roared and howled madly. He seemed so ferocious, yet he was also helpless and filled with despair. "Actually, it was all thanks to your actions of seizing the river diagram from me that I was able to grasp this path of mine. It made me completely lose the river diagram which I relied on, but what I got in return was my true Tao heart." Xianxia spoke softly. Actually, he'd really sighed with emotion for a long time in his heart. His fate had been linked closely to the river diagram since before he was born, and then he'd constantly gathered the river diagram fragments and relied on its might to constantly break through all obstacles he encountered throughout his path of cultivation. At the moment he arrived at the Tao terra firma for the first time, he'd similarly thought that the true secret of the ultimate path was to take control of the Genesis energy within the Tao terra firma. However, when the river diagram had been taken away from him and at that last instant before he died, Xianxia finally laid eyes on his true ultimate path. He saw a supreme path that transcended the Tao terra firma and was far superior to Genesis energy. It was his path. It was a path of his inner self. The inner self was himself. It was without the energy of the river diagram, without the energy of samsara, and was completely without any realms of cultivation, in divine energy, the sword Tao, the soul, or Tao comprehension. At that moment before death, all of these forces had been taken from him, and it was exactly because he'd lost all of them that Xianxia had fallen into an empty state. He finally broke through the smokescreen before his eyes, and he saw the scene beyond it. This process was a tribulation. The ancient character for tribulation could be further described as a process of the removal of energy. It was the removal of all energy to return to one's true self. That was Xianxia's path towards the Tao. It had broken through the so-called limits of the world, surpassed Genesis, and pushed open a door that went beyond the Tao terra firma. This door transcended the three dimensions, the myriad of Taos in this world, and the boundaries within the limits of all beings in this world. Since the ancient times until now, no one had ever seen through all of this. But at this moment, Xianxia had become the first person to ever pass through that door. If the Tao terra firma was described as a seed, then the chaos of the three dimensions was the period when it was sprouting, the myriad of worlds and the boundless grand Tao were a flower and its branches and leaves that had grown and matured from that seed. The vitality of the flower was the living beings throughout the world. But if the Tao terra firma was a seed, then were there even more seeds throughout the world? Who was the one who'd sowed the seeds? No one could imagine it. All of these things that were unimaginable was like an invisible door. Now, Xianxia had pushed that door open, and he'd laid eyes on a path of the inner self which was his own. This was a difference in attainment and enlightenment. The end of the ultimate path, in the opinion of the sovereign sex master, was Genesis energy, and it was the same for Fuxi, Nuwa, and all the others. However, only Xianxia knew that it wasn't the end. The true end was beyond that invisible door. Once he comprehended that, saw through it, and took control of it, The difference in them became obvious. At this moment, Xianxia had attained such a state. So long as he willed it, he could transform into samsara, into the river diagram, the myriad of worlds, or all the grand Taos in the cosmos. There was nothing he couldn't take the form of, so he was omnipresent. Similarly, all of it were unable to become obstructions to Xianxia. He didn't have to take control of them all, yet he'd surpassed all of them. There was no limit to the path of inner self. The sovereign sex master broke down completely. His hair was disheveled while a livid and fierce expression covered his face. His emotionless body was being tormented by emotions. Most importantly, his Tao heart had fallen apart. At this moment, he was in a state of anxiety, uneasiness, despair, and madness. He'd lost the supremely dignified and arrogant bearing he revealed just now, and he'd lost the extraordinary wisdom and ability he once possessed. He seemed like everything had been taken from him, and he'd been reduced to a beggar or even worse than a beggar, because he was utterly lost. Moreover, he hadn't noticed at all that Xianxia had vanished a long time ago. There wasn't even a trace of Xianxia left here, and it was like Xianxia had never existed. The first time they met each other in the Tao terra firma, Xianxia's Tao heart had suffered all sorts of torment because of his loyalties and emotions. In the end, the sovereign sex master who'd seized the river diagram and taken control of Genesis energy had gone mad, and he entered into the cycle of samsara. The second time they met, the sovereign sex master watched as the screen of light revealed the events that had occurred before he entered into the cycle of samsara. In the end, he lost control of his heart and broke down completely into madness. What would it be like if the second encounter was within a screen of light as well? At this moment, the sovereign sex master was looking at two screens of light. The first screen of light displayed the events when Xianxia had entered the Tao terra firma for the first time. The second screen of light displayed the events of their second encounter. The most horrifying thing to the sovereign sex master was that his figure on the second screen of light was looking at the first screen of light as well. He was waiting for Xianxia, but all that arrived before him was those two screens of light. In the end, he broke down once more. He had no enemy before him, but he was unable to see through the truth and reality of things, and his Tao heart was completely lost. That was what the sovereign sex master suffered during the third encounter. What if even the third encounter was within a screen of light as well? It would just form an endless cycle that made the sovereign sex master become completely lost within it. He would experience the torture of emotions and the pain from the collapse of his Tao heart, suffer the impact of going mad and falling into despair. He would fall into an eternal cycle of samsara that couldn't be escaped. That was Xianxia's punishment for the sovereign sex master, because any other method was insufficient to vent the hatred in Xianxia's heart. Meantime, at the unknown lands outside the Tao terra firma, the river of destiny was still flowing incessantly, and there was a screen of light above the river. The scenes displayed on the screen was the sovereign sex master's incessant journey through the cycle of samsara. It was the scenes of him being tortured to the point of breaking down and becoming lost over and over again. Xianxia sat casually at the side, and Fuxi, Nuwa, the first Netherworld Emperor, second Netherworld Emperor, Divine Tao Parasol Tree, Ant Exalt, Master of the Mancha period, and many other extraordinary figures were staring at the screen of light while standing nearby. Their expressions were changing indeterminately. They sometimes sighed repeatedly, sometimes clapped and roared with laughter, sometimes drank strong wine to their heart's content, sometimes sighed with emotion, and so on and so forth. But they were very clearly aware that the sovereign sex master had lost. It was impossible for him to ever free himself from it throughout his lifetime, and he was bound to spend eternity in endless torture. That was Xianxia's punishment to him. In the end, Fuxi withdrew his gaze. He stood looking at the screen of light, and he gazed at Xianxia instead while he sighed with emotion. It was all thanks to you. Xianxia smiled and didn't say anything. Kid, is everything that we are seeing now another illusion you created as well? I don't want to experience such pain as the sovereign sex master is. Nuwa spoke abruptly while she gazed at Xianxia with a slightly complicated gaze. No, I'm still the same as before, and I won't utilize such methods again in this world. Xianxia smiled as he spoke. He really wouldn't do such a thing because it would be too boring. It was even to the extent that he still maintained the strength he possessed before this. As for everything he'd obtained within the Tao Terra Firma, he'd concealed all of it. The reason he did that was indeed because he didn't want to make things too boring for himself. Because if he were to utilize his full strength, then the past, present, and future would all be reflected in his heart and the secrets of the entire world, and all its inhabitants would be unable to escape his detection. In that way, life would really not be interesting at all. As they said, it was lonely at the top. Even though standing aloof above the myriad of worlds and transcending all living beings allowed him to possess everything and become omnipresent, it was too lonely and boring. Xianxia had always been one who emphasized on relationships and loyalty. His dream had always been to just live like a normal person, be together with his parents and reunited with his loved ones. Perhaps cook a little for them when he was free. After all, how joyful and leisurely would such a life be? So, he didn't intend to utilize some of his power, unless danger that could threaten him appeared in the world. But it was obvious that something like that was bound to be impossible. Presently, he could be considered as the one and only supreme and eternal overlord. Then what do you intend to do now? Will you be leaving for the world beyond the Tao Terra Firma? Or will you be staying? Asked Fuxi. At this moment, many of them shot their gazes at Xianxia, and they stopped paying attention to the Sovereign Sex Master on the screen of light. Now that I've dealt with the Sovereign Sex Master, that largest rock which was weighing down on my heart has finally been removed. So, I naturally wouldn't go create problems for myself when I've finally obtained a chance to relax. Xianxia smiled. Obviously, he intended to stay. After they obtained this answer, all of them couldn't help but feel a faint trace of disappointment, even though they did feel like a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Xianxia was naturally able to discern that, so he immediately spoke seriously. Seniors, I could have never attained my current accomplishments without your care and kindness, so I'll naturally provide all of you with guidance if you seek the true secrets of the ultimate path. In an instant, all of their eyes lit up. They traveled all this way on their path of cultivation and even entered the Tao Terra Firma because they wanted to find the true secrets of the ultimate path. As for the trivial matters of the world, it couldn't attract their attention at all any longer. Now that they heard Xianxia make such a guarantee to them, they were naturally extremely gratified and filled with happiness. However, Xianxia was very clearly aware that it was probably not so simple for them to lay eyes on that invisible door. As they say, it's easy to know but hard to accomplish. Xianxia could naturally provide them guidance in terms of comprehension, but Xianxia couldn't provide them the enlightenment related to the true secrets of the ultimate path and that invisible door. It was like how Xianxia could tell them that such a door definitely existed in the world, but Xianxia could only describe its exact location and provide some guidance. However, he couldn't help them arrive before it, push it open, and walk through it. There was no time to lose as many of them were getting impatient. So Xianxia didn't delay and separated a strand of his will to lead them back into the Tao Terra Firma. But he himself was prepared to return to Oracle Mountain. However, to his surprise, even Fuxi and Nuwa actually wanted to stay back and search for the secrets of the ultimate path as well. Moreover, there was actually not a single one of those great figures who intended to leave the Tao Terra Firma. Xianxia couldn't help but chuckle. He instantly realized that they were bound to never leave unless they found the true secrets of the ultimate path. Xianxia didn't persuade them, and he just left silently by himself. God's Bane Heaven's order still covered the entire world. But in Xianxia's eyes, it had stopped moving in a disorderly manner, stopped sending calamities down into the world, and had become calm. Xianxia had no intention to destroy it. After all, God's Bane Heaven was just an existence formed from the order of the world, and it had no emotions. The only reason such an unexpected change had occurred to it was entirely because the Sovereign Sex Master had taken control of it. It was like a blade that was neither good nor bad, but it became the bloodied blade of a butcher when it fell into the Sovereign Sex Master's hands. Now, Xianxia had no intention to take control of it, and he felt that it was sufficient to allow God's Bane Heaven to ceaselessly cover the world like this. The energy of order was the foundation stone to maintain the world, and only something which no one could take control of could be considered as true order. However, order was bound to have its flaws and limitations, so she intended to mend the flaws within the order of God's Bane heaven. For example, Samsara, the unknown lands. A tall figure walked out from within the mist. It was a handsome young man in green clothes, with jet-black long hair that hung loosely down to his waist, and there was a smile hanging on his face. He seemed extraordinary and otherworldly. He held a wine gourd in his hand, and he was walking and drinking in such a carefree manner. When he walked out of the unknown lands, he placed his hands behind his back, looked towards the sky in the distance, and then spoke. Today, I, Xianxia, will rebuild the world. His voice was ethereal, yet it shot up into the 9 heavens and instantly swept throughout the cosmos. At this moment, all the living beings throughout the world seemed to have sensed it. They stopped everything they were doing and looked up into the sky while they revealed a solemn and devoted expression. And it seemed as if they were being cleansed by an invisible force. The Netherworld. The Nether Springs Grand Emperor presided over the Netherworld with a still and composed expression. The Queen of Judgment, Cui Qingning, had utilized bloody methods to suppress the unrest in the Netherworld a very long time ago. So the Nether Spring Hall, Granny Meng's Hall, the 6 Paths of Hell, the 10 Kings of Hell, the 18 Levels of Hell, and all the other areas in the Netherworld had recovered to their previous orderly states. So the living beings of the Netherworld welcomed a rare period of peace. However, only the Nether Springs Grand Emperor was very clearly aware that the Netherworld wasn't complete. The reason was that the 3 supreme Grand Daos which belonged to the Netherworld were still separated from it, so it wasn't as flourishing and glorious as it was during the reign of the 3rd Netherworld Emperor. The Netherworld. It was where Samsara resided. It was a form of order that judged all beings and upheld justice in the world. However, now that Samsara had ceased to exist, the order in the Netherworld was merely limited to the Netherworld itself, and it was unable to cover and link itself with the entire world. The Nether Spring Grand Emperor was waiting. He'd seen a ray of hope many years ago, and he hoped that little fellow who inherited the mantle of the 3rd Netherworld Emperor would be able to rebuild the Netherworld's glory. But at this point in time, that strand of hope still seemed to be very distant and hadn't shown itself until now. So, the Nether Spring Grand Emperor couldn't help but sigh occasionally with emotion. However, he'd never given up. He knew that even the Queen of Judgment, Cui Qingning, had never given up as well. If it was in terms of confidence, then the Queen of Judgment's confidence seemed to be stronger than his own. Clink! The pleasant sound of jade trinkets colliding with each other resounded, and then a bloody, murderous, and icy-cold aura swept over towards him. The Nether Spring Grand Emperor opened his eyes, and then he saw the Queen of Judgment walking over from afar. She wore a scarlet-red palace gown, jet-black hair that was coiled into a bun, and her aloof, icy-cold, yet exquisite face had a pair of scarlet-red lips which were curved into an indifferent arc. As she stood there casually, she emanated the aura of judgment and blood, and it was extremely horrifying. It has been very long since you've last come here. What alarmed you today? The Nether Spring Grand Emperor seemed to be lost in thought as he spoke. It's nothing. I've just come to have a look. Cui Qingning sat down on the ground while keeping her backbone straight, and even her face was icy cold as before. Moreover, she emanated an oppressive pressure. Even though she was like that, the Nether Spring Grand Emperor had still discerned that there was something clearly weighing down on Cui Qingning's heart. He didn't ask about it because it wouldn't make a difference. Since Cui Qingning had become the Queen of Judgment and started managing the Book of Life and Death, she seemed to have become a completely different person. No one knew what the thoughts in her heart were like. When he left all those years ago, he promised that he would definitely return to see me, and I've been constantly working hard and using all my ability to unify the disorderly Netherworld because I didn't want him to be disappointed when he returned. After a long moment of silence, she continued with a slightly upset tone. But there was actually no news of him after so many years have passed. The Nether Springs Grand Emperor fell silent. He was very clearly aware that Cui Qingning had definitely not come here to complain. Sure enough, she continued just a moment later. I intend to leave the Netherworld for some time. His eyes narrowed. You're going to look for him? Cui Qingning pursed her lips and remained silent. The Nether Spring Grand Emperor sighed. If you want to go, Then go. He knew that he was utterly powerless to stop her once she'd decided. She nodded and said, I'll be troubling you to take care of the netherworld during my absence. He smiled and said, Of course. Cui Qingning stood up immediately, turned around, and started walking away. She'd merely come here to notify the Nether Spring Grand Emperor. After all, she didn't know how long her journey would take or whether she would return. All she sought was to put an end to that knot in her heart. Right at this moment, an ethereal voice resounded abruptly, and it swept throughout the netherworld. In an instant, the hearts of all living beings shook while they revealed devoted expressions. Besides that, all things had gone silent as well. Only that supreme and ethereal voice was resounding through the netherworld. Today, I, Chun Shi, will rebuild the world. Cui Qingning's figure stiffened while a wisp of peerlessly brilliant radiance surged from within her clear eyes and undulated towards the surroundings. He's back. As she muttered these words, her voice carried a trace of anticipation that had been suppressed for a very long time, so it caused her voice to tremble slightly, clearly showed how excited she was. The Nether Spring Grand Emperor's heart shook as he stood up swiftly, and he stood by Cui Qingning's side while his aged face was covered with excitement. He really succeeded. In their senses, the order of the entire netherworld was undergoing a qualitative transformation after that voice resounded. It was the aura of samsara. Thank you for all your hard work throughout these years. A warm voice resounded within the empty hall they were in. Cui Qingning and the Nether Spring Grand Emperor simultaneously turned towards the source of the voice, and then they saw a familiar tall figure appear within their fields of vision and was walking towards them. The mortal dimension. Since the Heaven Tao had undergone an unexpected change and sent calamities down into the world, the mortal dimension couldn't avoid being unaffected as well. The flames of war raged throughout the mortal dimension, causing countless sects and powers to be annihilated overnight. The force which benefited the most from the calamity was the sovereign sect. The forces of the sovereign sect were like a swarm that swallowed the mortal dimension and caused countless storms of blood wherever they went. At this point in time, only a few powers throughout the mortal dimension were able to protect themselves. One of them was the Violet Thistle Bai clan. The Bai clan's patriarch Bai Jingchan was an expert in strategy and had reacted as soon as the calamity swept throughout the world. He gathered the forces of his entire clan and stayed within the boundaries of their clan in order to maintain the inheritance of the Bai clan. Even then, the Bai clan had still suffered great losses because of the calamity, and its forces were far inferior to what it used to be. At this moment, the Bai clan could be said to be covered in an aura of gloominess and depression, and the faces of every single one of their clansmen was filled with uneasiness and anxiousness. They were on the verge of collapse. If such a situation were to continue, then it wouldn't be long before their Bai clan would be completely destroyed. At the ancestral hall of the Bai clan, Bai Jingchen remained silent for a long time before he couldn't help but sigh. Now that it has come to this, we can only choose to fight to the death. We have no other choice. All the higher-ups of the Bai clan remained silent. They were clearly aware that they had no path of escape. It wasn't just the mortal dimension that was affected by the calamity had probably even swept through the immortal dimension as well. It seemed like there wasn't a single peaceful place in the entire world. Then we'll kill to our heart's content. Yes, the sovereign sect has staged a comeback, and it's impossible to stop. But it's impossible for them to make us submit. All of them gritted their teeth as they spoke, and they were filled with sorrow and resolve. Bai Wanqing and Bai Shi-11 were standing outside the ancestral hall, and their hearts couldn't help but feel extremely heavy when they heard the sorrowful voices coming from within the hall. The calamity was too dangerous indeed. The strength of man was limited, so how could it resist the heavens? Shi-11, are you willing to live and die with everyone? Asked Bai Wanqing in a soft voice. Shi-11 nodded firmly. Of course. As a daughter of the Bai clan, I naturally have to live and die with my clansmen. When she spoke up to this point, a wisp of disappointment couldn't help but suffuse her pretty face, and she muttered, But I have some regrets in my heart. I'm truly unwilling to die just like that. Bai Wanqing was stunned and said, You're still thinking about Chen Hao? Bai Shi 11 blushed a little, and she lowered her head as she spoke timidly. No, I'm just quite annoyed that he left without bidding farewell when we were young. Bai Wanqing smiled and rubbed Bai Shi 11's head as she said, You're already grown up yet still refuse to forget that? How silly. Bai Shi 11 said angrily, Mother, you don't understand. Are the events of my childhood not important? Now that I've grown up, I naturally know what I want. Bai Wanqing instantly felt like a headache was arriving. She'd always been curious about why Shi 11 attached such importance to the events of her childhood. After all, it was even to the extent that Shi 11 had been constantly thinking about it and had even refused many marriages because of it. Mother, we're probably unable to escape calamity this time. In any case, we're going to die, so you don't have to worry about me anymore. Bai Shi 11 consoled her mother. Tui, you jinx. Bai Wanqing spat on the ground, yet her herd grew even heavier and filled with worry. Could it be that our Bai clan is really going to be destroyed by this calamity? Suddenly, Bai Shi 11 exclaimed, Mother! Look! Quickly! Numerous crimson red and dazzling flowers had suddenly appeared in the sky. They were dreamlike and dyed the entire sky red. That seems to be the Paramitha flowers of the netherworld. Bai Wanqing's heart shook and she seemed to be dazed as she muttered those words. She couldn't figure out why the divine flowers of the netherworld would appear within the mortal dimension. The Paramitha flowers. Why have these flowers appeared in the mortal dimension? According to legend, these flowers possess the ability to guide the souls of the dead. It's a portion of the order of samsara. Could it be that the energy of samsara is about to appear in the mortal dimension? All the great figures in the Bai clan's ancestral hall had been alarmed by this development, and they stood up successively and gazed at the sky with indeterminate expressions on their faces. At this moment, such a scene wasn't just occurring in the Bai clan. All the living beings throughout the 3,000 large worlds and countless minor worlds of the mortal dimension had noticed the Paramitha flowers in the sky. They were crimson red like flames, and they seemed to be paving a path illuminated by fire. After that, all of them noticed that the members of the sovereign sect scattered throughout the mortal dimension seemed to suffer the wrath of the heavens at this moment. All of them immediately perished on the spot, while their souls were taken by an invisible hand and restrained within the path illuminated by fire created by the Paramitha flowers. For a time, countless souls formed a dense army that were led away by the Paramitha flowers and vanished. This scene instantly shocked all the living beings throughout the mortal dimension. They were astounded and filled with disbelief. Samsara appeared and the Paramitha was born. Such a phenomena was simply unprecedented. Does this mean that this calamity which has swept through the world is about to be over? Many living beings couldn't help but start crying from extreme joy, and they prostrated themselves on the ground and prayed with extreme devotion. In the Bai clan, all its clansmen who were lucky enough to survive the calamity until now were extremely excited and had started cheering. It was at this moment when the living beings of the entire mortal dimension were excited that an ethereal voice suddenly resounded through the world. Today, I, Chun Shi, will rebuild the world. That voice was extremely flat and indifferent as it resounded throughout every single corner of the mortal dimension, and it filled the hearts of all with boundless reverence. It was like the decree of a supreme overlord. Chun Shi. Bai Wanqing was stunned on the spot. Bai Shi 11's eyes opened wide while she pulled forcefully on Bai Wanqing's sleeves. It's Big Brother Chun Shi. Big Brother Chun Shi has saved us. Bai Jingqin couldn't help but roar with laughter as well, and his laughter shook the sky. I knew that kid was extraordinary, but the commotion he created this time is really fucking shocking. Is that so? Suddenly, a tall figure appeared here. He wore green clothes, had a handsome appearance, a smile on his face, and an extraordinary and composed bearing. Bai Jingqin's eyes almost popped out from their sockets, and it seemed like someone was choking him. Quite a while passed before he pointed a finger and Chen Shi and said, "It really was you." He raised his fist with the intention of striking Chen Shi on the shoulder. But for some unknown reason, a strand of rare reverence and resistance appeared in his heart. It was like his actions were a form of disrespect. Bai Jingqin's eyelids couldn't help but twitch. He was very well awake that while Xianxia's bearing seemed ordinary, it had actually arrived at a height which was even unimaginable to him, and no force in this world could disrespect Xianxia. Big brother Xianxia. A happy cry resounded as Bai Shi-11 instantly hugged Xianxia while happiness and excitement filled her face. How could she be bothered about showing any restraint when they'd been reunited after so long? Xianxia. Bai Wanqing stood at the side, and she was warm and modest just like she'd always been. In his days, Xianxia seemed to have gone back in time to the period that he was in Pine Mist City, and his grandfather, younger brother, and him depended on each other for their survival. At that time, Bai Shi-11 was only around 5 or 6 years old, and she was like a little lackey that followed Chen Hao around and played with him. At that time, Aunt Bai was warm just like this, and she silently took care of the two brothers. Fortunately, while time and the circumstances had changed, they were all still alive, and it was truly something worthy of celebration. Xianxia patted Shi-11 on the shoulder, and then he said to Bai Wanqing, "Aunt Bai, I found my parents, and I've come to take you with me." Bai Shi-11 raised her head and said anxiously, "Then what about me?" Xianxia chuckled. "We're all going together." As he spoke, he shot his gaze at Bai Jingchen. Bai Jingchen waved his hand and said, "If you're going to leave, then leave yourselves. My Bai clan must stay, and will only return to the immortal dimension when the Xenorace are annihilated. That's the will of my Bai clan, and it won't be swayed." The Xenorace. She suddenly realized that he'd overlooked the Xenorace's existence. "I should head to the Outerium to have a look when I'm free. I wonder what sort of place it is." She immediately decided. The ancient god domain. The distressed, miserable, and suffering inhabitants of the ancient god domain suddenly noticed that the calamity had actually vanished abruptly. The disciples of the sovereign sect who raged through the world while plundering and destroying had actually evaporated into thin air, and they'd vanished without a trace. However, unlike in the past, the Order of the Heaven Tao had an obscure energy that caused their hearts to tremble incessantly. It was the aura of samsara. It examined sin, judged life and death, and upheld justice for the world. Even the gods could only feel reverence when facing such an aura within the Order of the Heaven Tao, and they didn't dare offend it at all. Because all of them had the feeling that once samsara had appeared, then all who commit evil in the world would definitely suffer the most severe punishment. Even gods like them were unable to avoid it. Samsara. Such a taboo has actually transformed into a part of the Order of the Heaven Tao. Doesn't this mean that the sovereign sect has lost? That's definitely what happened. Who exactly has taken control of samsara, rebuilt the Order of the Heaven Tao, and calmed the unexpected changes in the Heaven Tao to provide deliverance to all living beings? Countless clamorous exclaims surged throughout all the regions and universes of the ancient god domain. All the gods and powers that had been lucky enough to survive the calamity until now were astounded, and their hearts were filled with boundless reverence. It wasn't long before all the living beings throughout the ancient god domain heard a voice from above the Heaven Tao. It was so indistinct yet so dignified. "Today, I, Xianxia, will rebuild the world." Xianxia. When this name entered into their ears, the entire ancient god domain seethed with excitement, while those who had enmity with Xianxia in the past were horrified to the extreme. Conversely, all those who had a relationship with Xianxia in the past were visibly delighted and beamed with joy, and they seemed as if they took pride in the glory that he'd achieved. No one had expected that Xianxia would have actually been able to defeat the sovereign sect's master, who was said to be invincible. Moreover, they'd never imagined that Xianxia had even transcended the Order of the Heaven Tao, and it could only submit before him. This day was remembered through history as the day of prayer for the arrival of the sovereign. It was a day to remember Xianxia's eternally grand deed of bringing peace to the world for all ages. Every single time this day arrived in the years after, all living beings would definitely cleanse themselves, burn incense, and pray solemnly in their hearts while sincerely wishing happiness to that eternally supreme existence. Even Tao Lords would willingly pray with devotion and wish that supreme existence well when this day came every single year. Of course, all of that are matters of the future. When Xianxi's voice resounded like the decree of a supreme overlord, all the disciples on Oracle Mountain had stopped what they were doing, and they cheered happily at the same time. He succeeded. Little junior brother succeeded. Young martial ancestral uncle is really extraordinary. The sovereign sex master has definitely been annihilated. Our Oracle Mountain will prosper through the ages with young martial ancestral uncle amongst us. All sorts of clamorous voices undulated while happiness and excitement covered all of their faces. Liang, Zhenlu Qing, Ming, Senior White, Yiyan, Tai Yunhai, the old scholar, Li Fuyao, Tang Xian, and all the others had smiles on their faces while the gloominess in their hearts had been completely wiped away. It was like all their gloominess had been brushed aside, and only happiness remained in their hearts. Meanwhile, Di Shun and Wen Daozhen exchanged glances and smiled at each other before they turned around and entered the Tower of Beginnings. Di Shun had promised Wen Daozhen that he would show Wen Daozhen something Chan she had left behind many years ago, once Chan she had attained victory in the Tao Terra Firma. Now it was time for him to fulfill his promise. An ancient stone pagoda stood towering while densely covered in mottled traces of time. It seemed to have experienced the baptism of countless years, and it emanated a solemn and lofty aura. It was the Tower of Beginnings. According to legend, it was created by Fuxi himself, and it was specially prepared for the disciples of Oracle Mountain. Within the Tower of Beginnings was actually a boundless expanse of the starry sky. Numerous stars were spread out within it, yet all of them were stationary. Moreover, every single one of them emanated a completely different aura of the Grand Tao. The further one went while cultivating within the tower, the greater the pressure of the Grand Tao which one had to endure would be, and the benefits obtained would increase along with this. All those years ago when Chan Shi had arrived at Oracle Mountain for the first time, he'd entered the Tower of Beginnings, and he'd broken the records of everyone else and arrived at the furthest star within the tower. At this moment, Di Shun and Wen Daozhen had arrived here. They were striding through the starry sky within the tower and moving forward incessantly. It wasn't long before Wen Daozhen stopped moving, and he pointed towards a star that was completely like ice. It was translucent, crystalline, and emanated a dazzling and piercingly cold aura. Wen Daozhen said, "My disciple Tang Xian cultivated here all those years ago." Di Shu glanced over and saw a sky-blue lake on the star, and an extremely inconspicuous palm-sized black paper boat floated in the lake. However, when one looked at it, it seemed pitch black like the veil of eternal night and possessed the unique might to endure all things in the world. After 18 years of closed-door cultivation, every year was different. I laughed and sighed at the destiny provided by the Grand Tao is always changing like a boat that floats aimlessly. These were the words that Tang Xian had left behind after he completed his cultivation here. Di Shun nodded and said, "Tang Xian's talent is sufficient to step foot onto the ultimate path." After that, the two of them continued forward. It wasn't long before Di Shun and Wen Daozhen stopped once more, and their gazes shot towards a sky-blue star, and its aura glistened brightly and circulated endlessly. There was a limestone table on the star. The surface of the table was inscribed with a row of simple and ordinary writing. "Water is gentle. It provides for all yet conflicts with none. It exists everywhere. In the face of attack, the enemy is unaware what it guards. When it puts up a defense, the enemy is unaware where its defenses lie, and it's impossible to shake." Signed by eldest disciple of Fuxi's line, Wu Xuechan. A wisp of a complicated expression appeared in Di Shun's eyes when he saw this, and he spoke with an upset tone. Just as the sovereign sex master said, if he were to abandon all trivial matters and concentrate on his cultivation, then Xuechan's current accomplishments would definitely not be inferior to senior brother Fuxi's accomplishments from all those years ago. Unfortunately, when Daozhen shook his head and smiled, "There's no need to feel that it's a pity. Chen Shi will definitely be able to bring Xuechan back once he returns. Now that the sovereign sect has been destroyed and the sovereign sex master has failed short of success, the order of the Heaven Tao has undergone a qualitative change, and it possesses the order of samsara within it. Under such circumstances, Xuechan just has to concentrate on his cultivation, and he will definitely gain extraordinary improvements in his path of cultivation." Shun nodded and took a deep breath. Come. I'll take you the place where that kid, Xianxia, cultivated all those years ago. When Daozhen smiled. That's exactly what I came for. Both of them continued forward again until they arrived at the end of the tower, and they saw a single star floating all by itself in space. It was completely round while hazy and clear-colored radiance surged on its surface. Surprisingly, if one looked through the layer of clear radiance, a dense mass of divine chains that simply seemed like a spiderweb could be seen, and it enveloped the entire star. All of them were divine chains of the Grand Tao. Every single one of them represented a law of the Grand Tao, and they contained the quintessence profundities of the Grand Tao. When looked at from afar, it was like the entire star was shackled by divine chains of the Grand Tao. The dense aura of the Grand Tao and dazzling and resplendent divine chains of the Grand Tao were interwoven together, and it formed a peerlessly rare and marvelous spectacle. This was the last star at the end of the Tower of Beginning. Since the ancient time, Xianxia had been the only disciple of Oracle Mountain to arrive and cultivate here. At this moment, as he gazed at this star and thought of Xianxia's current accomplishments, even when Daozhen felt a wisp of indescribable excitement and even a trace of rare nervousness. It was like he'd arrived at the divine vestige of a sovereign, and he had no choice but to fix his bearing and couldn't help but arouse a trace of respect. Shun was the same. His face had suddenly become solemn and serious. Both of them were seniors who were standing towering in the Daolord realm for countless years. They protected Oracle Mountain and were renowned throughout the ancient god domain. Yet now, they revealed a rare respectful bearing as if they'd come to offer praise to an exalted being. The respect they revealed was a form of acknowledgement towards Xianxia's current strength, and it was a form of yearning and reverence towards the true ultimate path. A stone tablet that was shaped like a sharp talisman of the sword stood on the star, and a row of words were inscribed on the stone tablet with the tip of a finger. One day, I'll definitely stand above the heavens. Every single stroke was simple and unhurried, yet they revealed a firm, resolute, and indescribable boldness and will. One day, I'll definitely stand above the heavens. Both Shun and Wen Daozhen simultaneously repeated those words as if they'd been shocked in their hearts. And as they recalled everything Xianxia had experienced in the ancient god domain, the depths of their Tao hearts couldn't help but be moved by these words. One day, I'll definitely stand above the heavens. All those years ago when Xianxia cultivated in the Tower of Beginnings, he was only a universe-enlightened ancestral god, yet he'd possessed such a path in his heart. One could only wonder what sort of stir it would cause if word of this were to spear. Now, Xianxia really possessed might that stood above the heavens. It was even to the extent that no one throughout time immemorial could stand above the heavens like he did, and he'd even rebuilt the order of the Heaven Tao with the energy of samsara. What was it like to be the one and only supreme sovereign? It was obvious if one looked at Xianxia. Swish! Suddenly, the countless divine chains of the Grand Tao which enveloped the star had suddenly fluctuated, and then they surged like tidewater into that stone tablet. The stone tablet was just an ordinary object before this. But at this moment, it seemed like it had obtained the blessings of the heavens, and it possessed a supreme and otherworldly aura. This made the innumerable divine chains of the Grand Tao in the surroundings to submit before it and stand on guard around it. They prostrated themselves before that row of simple and unrestrained words. Shun and Wen Daozhen's hearts shook when they witnessed such a miraculous scene, and the devoted and solemn expressions on their faces even faintly revealed a trace of reverence. To stand above the heavens. This was indeed an act of standing above the heavens. Shun decided that this stone tablet would be the supreme inheritance of Oracle Mountain from today onward, and only disciples of Oracle Mountain would be allowed to view and learn from it. At the foot of Oracle Mountain, two figures were walking up the winding and rough limestone path up the mountain. The figure on the left had green clothes on, a handsome appearance, and an extraordinary and otherworldly bearing. He had his hands placed casually behind his back, and he seemed to be relaxed and at ease. The figure on the right wore white clothes. His hair was white as snow, his face warm and indifferent, and his eyes carried a deep smiling expression within them. It was Xianxia and Wuxia. The little path on the mountain was quiet and beautiful. Wuxia had walked up the path countless times in the past, but he sighed endlessly with emotion in his heart while he took the path this time. After experiencing death once, one's mental state would definitely become different. That was exactly what Wuxia was experiencing right now. Waves of cheering and discussion frequently drifted down from above. It was the voices of all the disciples from Oracle Mountain, and they were discussing the battle in the Tao Terra Firma. Even though they hadn't witnessed it with their own two eyes, when they noticed the heaven Tao grow calmer and possess the aura of samsara, all of them were clearly aware that Xianxia had definitely won the battle. Wuxia couldn't help but smile happily when he heard the discussions, and then he turned his head towards Xianxia and asked, "Little junior brother, do you really not intend to stay on Oracle Mountain?" Xianxia spoke casually. "Eldest senior brother, regardless of where I am, I only have to give it a thought and I can appear anywhere throughout the cosmos. So, what's the difference between staying on Oracle Mountain or not?" Wuxia chuckled for a while before he said, "I forgot that no one in this world can bind you anymore." Xianxia glanced at Wuxia when he heard this, and then a strand of warmth surged out from within his heart. He knew that Wuxia had always taken him to be the little junior brother that Wuxia had to protect, so Wuxia was always thinking about him. Now, Wuxia was unable to get accustomed to the fact that he didn't have to take care of Xianxia anymore. "Eldest senior brother, you don't have to worry about Oracle Mountain anymore from today onward. You can just concentrate on your cultivation. No one in this world will dare to touch the disciples of our Oracle Mountain while I exist." Xianxia spoke seriously. Wuxia patted Xianxia on the shoulder and roared with laughter. "That's exactly what I intended to do." As they spoke, both of them had arrived at the peak of Oracle Mountain. "Young martial ancestral uncle. Eldest martial ancestral uncle." A rough voice resounded abruptly, and it carried extremely pleasant surprise. Surprisingly, it was Tu Meng. It was like a single stone that caused 1,000 ripples on the calm surface of a lake. In an instant, all the disciples of Oracle Mountain who were gathered on the peak of the mountain, Zhen Luqing, Senior White, Aoyang Yiyan, and all the others shot their gazes over at the same time. For some unknown reason, the extremely clamorous atmosphere here quieted down when they saw Xianxia and Wuxia's familiar figures. All of their eyes opened wide while their faces were covered in excitement and delight. However, they didn't dare make any clamorous noise as they were afraid of disturbing this precious moment. Xianxia and Wuxia exchanged glances and smiled. Both of them were extremely gratified and happy when they saw all of these familiar faces. It was a scene of reunion after parting for a long time. There was no need for words because everything could be understood with just the heart. 3 days later, Xianxia said goodbye to everyone on Oracle Mountain, and he left swiftly with his parents, Zhen Luqing, Senior White, Ming, Aoyang. Yan didn't leave with them. She decided to join Oracle Mountain and become Wuxia's personal disciple. She was a disciple of the sovereign sect in the past, and she'd even pursued Xianxia for many years in the past. However, all of that were matters of the past, and she wasn't the same person anymore. As for why she didn't leave with Xianxia and chose to stay in Oracle Mountain, no one knew the exact realm. Xianxia had faintly guessed something yet didn't say anything. The thing that truly surprised Wuxia and the other disciples of Oracle Mountain was that Liang had completely changed her usual dressing, which made her seem like a man, and she showed no unwillingness at all as she left Oracle Mountain and left with Xianxia. According to Liang, she'd taken utmost care of Xianxia throughout these years, so it was time for her to follow by himself and enjoy the happiness of leisure. Wuxia and the others were speechless when they saw her proud, happy, and in high spirits. However, in their hearts, they knew that Liang wasn't able to forget Xianxia. Of course, they wouldn't expose that because the consequences of making Liang embarrassed were very severe. From that day, the ancient god domain, which had been in unrest after calamity descended, had completely recovered its peaceful state of the past. However, unlike before, the order of the heaven Tao had the energy of samsara within it, so all the gods didn't dare commit all sorts of evil as they had in the past. Samsara, it examined sin, judged life and death, and upheld justice for the world. Even Tao lords didn't dare act rashly before this order of the heaven Tao, let alone the other gods. Conversely, the myriad of living beings throughout the world that had been regarded as ants in the past obtained a rare opportunity to rise up in the world because of the order of samsara. At the very least, so long as they didn't commit any evil, then they wouldn't be captured or killed by powerful sects and clans for no reason. That was the deterrence of the order of samsara. No one throughout the world dared to go against it. That was the lifelong wish of the third Netherworld Emperor. He wanted all the living beings in the world to receive good from doing good, and to be punished for their crimes. In the years after, Oracle Mountain was considered as the one and only supreme and transcendent power throughout the ancient god domain, even though Oracle Mountain didn't show itself in public anymore. Everyone was aware that it was a place which the supreme sovereign, Xianxia, favored. After all, Xianxia had been a disciple of Oracle Mountain, so the myriad of living beings throughout the ancient god domain regarded Oracle Mountain as a divine place that could only be revered and tolerated no disrespect. Unlike Oracle Mountain, both the Sovereign Sect and Divine Institute were destroyed. They were completely obliterated from the annals of history, and it was impossible for the flames of those sects to be rekindled. Besides that, Nuwas Dao Palace and the Dao Institute rose from the ashes of the calamity they suffered, and they obtained the protection of the heavens. So, they became so strong that they surpassed their past glory. All of this was because of Xianxia. It wasn't exaggerated at all to say that those powers which were on good terms with Xianxia had obtained all sorts of benefits in the years after. For example, Shintu Yenron's Shintu clan, Yechen's Ye clan, Luwuhan's Lu clan, Zhuanyu Shui's Zhuanyu clan, and various other powers had become the strongest powers beneath Oracle Mountain, Nuwas Dao Palace, and the Dao Institute. As for those who had enmity with Xianxia in the past, they silently fell into decline and vanished in the following years. For example, the Luo clan which Luo Xiaonong belonged to, the Jin clan which Jin Qingyang belonged to, the Di clan which Di Jun belonged to. All of them were unable to avoid such an outcome. Of course, all of that occurred in the future. After Xianxia left Oracle Mountain, he immediately flashed towards the Dao Emperor Academy in the Immortal Dimension. The Immortal Dimension. The Immortal Dimension was said to possess 4,900 continents, and every single continent contained countless cities, vast territories, abundant resources, and countless geniuses. Since Xianxia had taken over Meng Xinghe's position as the Dean of Dao Emperor Academy, he'd annihilated the Sovereign Sect and crushed a group of immortal kings to make them an example for the entire Immortal Dimension. So, the Immortal Dimension was in a state of peace while there were no signs of the disciples of the Sovereign Sect wreaking havoc through the Immortal Dimension. However, when the unexpected change had occurred in the Heaven Dao, the Immortal Dimension had been unable to avoid being affected as well, and it fell into a state of unrest. Even with the position of Dao Emperor Academy, it hadn't been able to avoid being affected, and it had almost fallen into the hands of the Sovereign Sect. Fortunately, Jiyu had arrived at that critical moment, and he immediately dealt with the situation and resolved the calamity which the Immortal Dimension was facing, allowing the Immortal Dimension to return to its prior peaceful state. At this moment within Dao Emperor Academy, regardless of whether it was the instructors or the students of the academy, all of them were in animated discussion. They were discussing just a single thing, and they were extremely clamorous and bustling. Just a few days ago, countless strands of clear light had suddenly descended from the sky in the Immortal Dimension, and every single one of them were like the radiance of the Grand Tao as they enveloped the 4,900 continents of the Immortal Dimension. Such a scene instantly alarmed living beings throughout the Immortal Dimension, and they acutely noticed that the heavens had changed. Even though they were unable to discern its actual changes, all living beings had a feeling in their hearts that the heavens above them wasn't the same anymore, and it had an obscure and indescribable aura. It was also at that very moment which a voice swept through the Immortal Dimension. Today, I, Xianxia, will rebuild the world. At that moment, the world fell silent while the hearts of all living beings trembled, and they prostrated themselves on the ground while worshipping devotedly. It was also on that very same day which the entire Immortal Dimension found out that the grand scene of the heavens being changed had actually been done by that legendary figure who'd entered Dao Emperor Academy as the first in its test, took control of Dao Emperor Academy as its dean, and killed numerous immortal kings to make an example of them. Xianxia. That name wasn't unfamiliar to all the living beings in the immortal dimension because countless people took delight in talking about his past deeds. But they hadn't imagined that his voice would actually reappear in the immortal dimension one day, and he would actually issue such a supreme decree. Such power and influence could simply be described as belonging to a supreme sovereign. Even though many days had passed since then, the phenomena in the sky which had occurred that day in Xianxia's voice were still being discussed and causing countless uproars throughout the immortal dimension. It was the same in Dao Emperor Academy right now. The instructors had stopped teaching, and they'd gathered together to happily discuss everything about Xianxia when he was in the academy all those years ago. The students had stopped cultivating, and they'd formed groups of 3 to 5 while the places Xianxia had resided in Dao Emperor Academy had become hallowed grounds that they were fighting with each other to visit. Some instructors who were close to Xianxia like Jinlu, Zhao Mingli, Ji Shenbing, Yi Tang, and the others even started sighing with emotion, and they described everything related to Xianxia during those years to their own disciples. They were students of Dao Emperor Academy just like Xianxia had been all those years ago, but now that the circumstances had changed with the passage of time, they'd lost their status as students and had become instructors of the academy instead. Moreover, all of them had attained the immortal king realm. That should have been something worthy of being proud of, but it was simply like the difference between the heavens and the earth when it was compared with Xianxia. Actually, they couldn't be compared at all. Dao Emperor Academy was very bustling, and it was even 100 times more bustling than it had been in the past. However, only Qiu Xinshu, the dean of Dao Emperor Academy, was nowhere to be seen amidst this bustling atmosphere. After Xianxia had advanced into the god rank realm, that scholar who was a disciple of Fuxi's fourth disciple, the old scholar, had taken over Dao Emperor Academy and became the new dean. But at this moment, Qiu Xinshu was standing outside a hall with a hesitant expression on his face. He was actually hesitating if he should step foot into the hall. After all, he could hear a wave of questions resounding frequently from within the hall, and it was like the sound of quarreling. "Clone, why hasn't my husband returned until now? So many days have passed. What's he so busy doing that he even refuses to return home? Clone, you and my father are from the same body. Only you are aware of my father's whereabouts. So, please don't keep it from us." My mother's heart had been burning with anxiety throughout the past few days, and she's on the verge of suffering from qi deviation. Clone, Yuner only wants to know when my grandfather will be coming back. He hasn't abandoned us, right? Clone. Clone. All sorts of clamorous noise resounded from within the hall, and it caused Qiu Xinshu to be hesitant and dare not step forward into it. It couldn't be helped. He couldn't afford to offend anyone within the hall, and he didn't dare to offend them as well. Actually, he'd come here because he wanted to ask a question as well. Where exactly is Martial Uncle Xianxia? In the hall, Xianxia, who wore an apricot yellow Taoist robe, had quite a headache. Even though he was a clone, his mind, intelligence, character, flesh, and blood were all similar to his main body. There was no difference between them at all. However, he didn't know whether to laugh or to cry because since his main body had attained the god rank realm and headed to the ancient god domain, all of his friends and family had treated him as a mere clone, and he was unable to replace his main body's position in their hearts at all. For example, both Qing Shui and Fan Yunlan were his Dao companions, but they'd constantly treated him as a clone throughout these years, and he was really at a loss for whether he should laugh or cry. It was even to the extent that those two little fellows, Chen Yu and Chen En, weren't willing to get close to him, and they constantly refused to address him by name. That wasn't a huge deal, and his clone understood their feelings. After all of this had arisen out of their perceptions and feelings towards him, and feelings were usually unreasonable. So, he wasn't able to change the current situation. Thus, Xianxia's clone had been practically spending all his time throughout these years in meditation, and he was rarely able to enjoy any gatherings with these friends and family of his. Needless to say, it was a regret indeed. At the very least, every single time he thought about this, Xianxia's clone would have the pressing desire for his main body to return and put an end to this incorrect understanding. As if his main body had finally heard him, a wave of clear light had suddenly descended from the sky of the immortal dimension just a few days ago, and then his main body's voice resounded while a change suddenly occurred in the heaven Tao, causing all the myriad of living beings in the immortal dimension to be socked and explode into countless uproars. This allowed everyone to realize that Xianxia's main body would probably be returning to the immortal dimension soon. Under such circumstances, it was impossible for Xianxia's clone to continue cultivating even if he wanted to, because practically all his friends and family knew that he was one with his main body, and he would be aware at the first possible moment if Xianxia's main body had returned. So, it didn't take long for a huge group of them to surge into the hall which Xianxia's clone resided in. Just like this very moment, it wasn't just Qing Shui and Fan Yunlan who were in the hall. Even Chen Hao, Fei Lingsui, and the others from the Pine Mist City's Chun clan were all within the hall. Chen Hao had a single son in his line, and it was Chen Yu. Chen Yu's wife was Yu Wenting, and the two of them had a son who was nicknamed Chen Baobao and actually named Chen Baojing. On the other hand, as for Xianxia's wives, he had Qing Shui and Fan Yunlan who'd respectively given birth to Chen En and Chen Nuo. Chen En's wife, Wei Zitong, had a daughter with him who was nicknamed Chen Yunyun and actually named Chen Yunji. Those were the most important core figures of the current Chun clan. Of course, they weren't the only descendants of the Pine Mist City's Chun clan. Countless years had passed since Xianxia had utilized Emperor Yu's 9-continent divine cauldron to transport the entire minor world, Ancient Hall, which was home to the Darchu dynasty, to Dao Emperor Academy. In these years, the Chun clan had the presence of Xianxia's clone and the protection of the Dao Emperor Academy, so its strength had undergone numerous transformations and grew with each passing day. Couldn't be compared to the past at all. However, only the most important core figures of the Pine Mist City's Chun clan could enter Xianxia's clone's residence. Besides them, a few friends who had a close relationship with him were qualified to meet Xianxia's clone, like the Profound Vision Old Turtle King Xianjing, the Nine-Tailed Fox King Qingqiu, the Emperor of the Darchu dynasty Huangfu Zhongling, the Supreme Elder of the Wandering Cloud Sword Sect Bei Heng, the Sect Master of the Wandering Cloud Sword Sect Ling Kongzi, and various others. At this moment, all of these core figures of the Chun clan and Xianxia's close friends from all those years ago were gathered within the hall. Every single one of them was asking for news of Xianxia's main body, and they seemed extremely impatient. So, Xianxia's clone had a headache. After all, he hadn't sensed the aura of his main body in the immortal dimension at all. So how could he answer them? He'd explained on more than one occasion, but the people gathered in the hall were clearly doubtful, so he was at a loss for what to do. Clone, don't blame me for being rude if you don't tell us the truth. Suddenly, an extremely magnificent and imposing divine beast, Pishio, stood up lazily from the ground. He was like a snow-white lion with the whiskers of a dragon, and he had golden pupils within his jade-green eyes. There was a very tiny white clothes figure standing on the Pishio's head with his arms crossed before his chest, and his handsome face was filled with pride and arrogance. At this moment, he was glaring coldly at Xianxia's clone. Surprisingly, it was Ling Bai and Bai Kuei. However, while Bai Kuei's appearance hadn't changed after so many years, the infant Pishio, Bai Kuei, had grown up into a true auspicious beast, Pishio. Many others immediately chimed in with support when they heard Ling Bai, especially Chen Baobao and Chen Yunyun. They even seemed like they wished for nothing but to see the world burn, and they started to cheer for and encourage Ling Bai. Xianxia's clone was instantly exasperated and gritted his teeth as he glared at Ling Bai. Ling Bai, you actually dare to grow more and more audacious before me? Why don't you tell me how you'll be rude to me? Ling Bai raised his chin, and then grunted coldly in a proud tone. It's very simple. I'll give you a beating. Xianxia's clone couldn't help but chuckle. Give me a beating? Are you sure? Ling Bai's face fell. Stop looking down on me. I'm not a match for you by myself. But what if Bai Kuei and Amon join me? Bai Kuei shook his head and then roared loudly as if he was making a show of strength. The little yellow bear, Amon, who had an immortal fruit in his arms and was gobbling it up, instantly opened his eyes wide, and he struck his chest and spoke fiercely. Right, I'm here as well. Me too. A horned divine beast that was like a Qilin yet wasn't a Qilin, and was completely covered in dreamlike starlight, shot his deep gem-like eyes towards Xianxia's clone. It was the Star Soul beast, Starry. It was a divine beast that Xianxia had obtained by chance in the immortal dimension, and it was clearly much stronger than it had been in the past. Right, Starry is with us as well. Ling Bai nodded like a commanding general, and he gazed provocatively at Xianxia's clone with Ling Bai, Amon, and Starry. Xianxia's clone was speechless. He couldn't help but rub his strained forehead and seemed to be having a headache as he said, "Stop causing trouble. I'll lock all of you up if you continue annoying me. And you can dream of eating anything." These words were simply like extraordinary disrespect and a huge threat to gluttons like them. As soon as he finished speaking, Ling Bai, Bai Kuei, Amon, and Starry were furious. "Don't you dare! I'll fight you to the death! Roar! Roar!" When they saw Ling Bai and the others reveal murderous looks on their faces as they sought to attack Xianxia, all the others in the hall didn't have any intention to stop Ling Bai's group. Moreover, they even clapped and applauded Ling Bai's group as if they craved such chaos. Xianxia's clone was instantly infuriated upon witnessing this, and he stood up swiftly and gritted his teeth. "Looks like I've been too easy on all of you throughout these years. Your bodies are itching for a beating, huh?" As soon as he finished speaking, everyone in the hall thought that a show was about to begin. However, Xianxia's clone was suddenly stunned on the spot as if his soul had left his body. However, Ling Bai and the others didn't care about all of that, and they instantly charged forward and attacked ferociously. It seemed like they intended to teach Xianxia's clone a good lesson. However, right at this moment, a strange smile suddenly curled up onto the corners of Xianxia's clone's lips, and then he raised his right hand lightly and grabbed Ling Bai. Next, he swung his left hand lightly, and then Bai Kuei fell backward on his butt while the thick layer of fluffy fur in his body undulated like a wave. "Ow!" Amon's slap was just about to descend when Xianxia's clone glared at Amon, and it terrified Amon to the point he froze on the spot like an idiot. As for Starry, Xianxia had kicked Starry flying, and Starry rolled on the ground like a bottle gourd and was completely dazed. In an instant, everyone here was shocked. All of them were clearly aware of how strong Ling Bai and the others were. Even if they couldn't defeat Xianxia's clone who had attained the Immortal King realm a long time ago, they still had the strength to fight him in battle. Yet now, their attacks had been resolved with ease in just a moment. How could that be possible? When all of them looked up at Xianxia's clone again, they noticed that he'd suddenly vanished. All of them couldn't help but be stunned by this development. Right at this moment, laughter resounded from outside the hall. "Ling Bai, do all of you still want to give me a beating?" A tall figure walked into the hall along with this voice. He wore green clothes, had a handsome appearance, dense jet-black hair that hung loosely down to his waist, and an otherworldly and extraordinary bearing. It was Xianxia's main body. At the moment he returned to the immortal dimension, he'd instantly formed a link with his clone and received all of his clone's memories and experiences throughout these years, so he was clearly aware of everything that had occurred in the immortal dimension throughout these years. As for the farce occurring in the hall right now, Xianxia was clearly aware of the embarrassing situation that his clone had faced, and he couldn't help but feel amused by it. This was the tricky side of emotions. His friends and loved ones only acknowledged his main body yet had never regarded his clone to be him, and he couldn't blame them for that. So, as soon as he returned, Xianxia had placed his clone within him, and he'd decided that he would make cautious use of this technique in the future. At this moment, many people here had a slightly strange feeling when they saw Xianxia who wore green clothes walking into the hall. It was like they'd seen the real Xianxia return, but they were unable to confirm it. So all of them were stunned on the spot. Even Ling Bai and the others were stunned and quite puzzled. The clamorous atmosphere here actually seemed extremely quiet right now. Xianxia strode into the hall, and then his gaze flashed through Qing Shui, Fan Yunlan, Chen Hao, Fei Lingcue, Chen Yu, Chen En, and the others, and then an indescribably complex strand of emotions while he felt dazed and sighed with emotion. Time seemed to have frozen at this moment, and the surroundings were quiet and still. The scenes of the past shot through Xianxia's heart like tidewater, and it caused his heart to surge incessantly as well. "Husband!" Suddenly, an exclaim resounded by his ear, and then a sweet fragrance assaulted his nose as a beautiful figure had wrapped her arms tightly around him. She lowered his head and saw a gorgeous face in front of him. She had ink-black brows, a fine nose, cherry lips, skin that was snow-white and delicate, and a pair of eyes that seemed like two glistening pools of dew. She was breathtaking. It was Fan Yunlan. Tender feelings instantly surged out from Xianxi's heart, and he held her in his arms. However, while there were 1,000 things that he wanted to tell her, he didn't know where to start. The others within the hall seemed as if they'd been jolted away from a dream when they witnessed this scene. And they finally confirmed that the Xianxia before them wasn't the clone from before but Xianxi's main body. In other words, the true Xianxia in their opinions had finally appeared before them. In an instant, all of them couldn't restrain the excitement in their hearts. Xianxia, a delicate and extraordinarily gorgeous white figure, leaned lightly on Xianxi's side. It was Xianxia. As he gazed at Xianxia's familiar face which had always been on his mind, and a dazed expression couldn't help but appear within his clear eyes. Big brother. Light-hearted laughter resounded from Chun Hao. Father. Uncle. Chun En and Chun Yu charged over as well. Chun En's wife, Wei Zitong, and Chun Yu's wife, Shui Wenting, followed them over as well. Both of them gazed at Xianxia with excitement and anxiety, and they seemed like they were at a loss for what to do. Grandfather! Grandfather! Chun Baojing and Chun Yunji came over as well, and happiness covered their faces. In merely a short moment, Xianxia was completely surrounded, and there was more than one circle of people around him. Besides that, all sorts of voices resounded in the surroundings, causing it to seem extremely bustling. As for Ling Bai, Bai Kuei, Amon and Starry, even though they urgently desired to squeeze forward, how could they compete with the others? So all of them started shouting endlessly from their anger. When Chun Lingjun and Zhuoqiu Shui walked into the hall, it was such a bustling scene that entered their eyes, and their eyes couldn't help but open wide while slight disbelief could be seen within their eyes. Our Pine Mist City's Chun, she has so many descendants after all these years? It wasn't long before Liang and Ming walked in as well. When she saw Qing Shui and Fan Yunlan who were snuggled up closely to Qianxia, Liang's glistening lips couldn't help but twitch imperceptibly. On the other hand, Ming couldn't help but be stunned because it was the first time that she'd witnessed such a scene. Moreover, Liang instantly placed her hand on her forehead and couldn't help but sigh softly when she heard some of them address Chen. She is uncle, father, and even grandfather. Ming was completely stunned. Father? Grandfather? This fellow doesn't just have wives, he even has grandchildren. What do you think? Do you still intend to be with that fellow now? Liang glanced at Ming and spoke via voice transmission. What are you talking about? Ming was stunned. Oh, looks like you refuse to give up. Unfortunately, according to my knowledge, those two women are only two of his lovers. You'll probably give up when you meet all of his other women. Liang chuckled. Why would I do that? Ming was puzzled. Liang couldn't help but sigh with distress when she saw Ming's muddled appearance. Never mind. There's no need to mention it. You wouldn't understand even if I told you. Liang paused for a moment before a wisp of a firm expression suddenly appeared on her peerlessly beautiful face, and she gritted her teeth as she said, But don't worry. So long as I'm here, those lovers who surround little junior brother wouldn't dare to do anything to you. Humph. Besides getting his parents' approval, they still have to get my approval if they want to enter my little junior brother's family. Ming asked. Then what about you? Liang was stunned. What about me? After that, she understood what Ming meant, and her fair and pretty face instantly had a wisp of embarrassment on it. After that, she waved her hand angrily and said, Don't ask about me. Just take care of yourself. Ming couldn't help but chuckle. She really pursed her lips and didn't speak further, but she couldn't help but arouse complicated emotions in her heart, because she hadn't imagined that the Xianxia whom she knew would actually be favored by so many women. It was something she'd never had any knowledge about. The atmosphere in the hall was bustling. Qiu Xianshu, who stood outside the hall, seemed as if a heavy burden was lifted from his shoulder, and he let out a long sigh before a wisp of happiness which couldn't be concealed appeared on his face. He's back. Martial Uncle is finally back. Xianxia forcefully restrained his impulse to charge into the hall, and he left hastily in the end. On this day, the Dean of Dao Emperor Academy, Xianxia, announced that the previous Dean, Chen Shi, had returned to the Immortal Dimension and was in Dao Emperor Academy right now. This news was simply like a storm that instantly swept out of Dao Emperor Academy and moved at an inconceivable speed. It swept through all 4,900 continents of the Immortal Dimension in just a short period of half a day. The entire Immortal Dimension was stirred, and it caused countless waves to surge through it. Southbridge Continent, for Divinity City. The Liang clan. Young Miss, there's news of him. The previous Dean of Dao Emperor Academy, Chen Shi, has returned to the Immortal Dimension, and he's at the Academy right now. A maidservant had a flushed face as she charged by numerous palaces and arrived within a courtyard, and then she shouted with excitement about the news she'd just received. A short moment of silence ensued before a chilly voice sounded out from behind the tightly closed door of a pavilion in front of the maidservant. "All right, you can leave." The maidservant was stunned. She seemed to be unable to believe the reaction of her young miss, and it took her some time before she finally left with embarrassment. On the other hand, Liang Bing, who resided behind the tightly closed door, seemed like she'd gone mad. She was flipping everything over as she searched all over, and a long time passed before she finally found the clothes which she'd worn that day when she'd met Chen Shi for the first time. A short while passed before Liang Bing had finished changing, and then she stood before a smooth and extremely reflective bronze mirror. A slender and graceful figure had appeared in the mirror. A tight white shirt that was tied up at the waist, black slim-fit pants that fully brought out the curves of her slender legs, bright and sharp high heels that housed a pair of gorgeous and fair feet. Her clothing vividly displayed her figure, and it brought out a unique sense of beauty from her. Besides that, her long wavy golden hair was tied up into a bun behind her head to reveal an icy cold yet peerlessly beautiful face with red and glistening lips and smooth and fair skin. "You damnable fellow! I haven't dressed myself up for so many years since you left," Liang Bing muttered as she looked at herself in the mirror. As she spoke, she placed a black-rimmed glasses on her slightly high nose, causing her to emanate a strong aura of a queen that was intellectual, noble, and proud. Such dressing was truly unique in the world, and Liang Bing was the only person in the Immortal Dimension who liked to dress up in this way. However, she'd stopped dressing like this after Chen Shi left all those years ago. "Humph. Those women who were infatuated with you will definitely be waiting for a chance to strike when they heard of this news. But at the very least, they can't compete with my dressing." Liang Bing whistled complacently at herself in the mirror, and then she turned around and walked out of the tightly closed door. Her high heels emanated clear and melodious taps as she strode, and it was beautiful just like her current state of mind. When Chen Shi had returned to the mortal dimension while he was cultivating in the Immortal Dimension, he'd utilized Emperor Yu's 9-continent divine cauldron to take the Minor World, Ancient Hall, and the Dark Reverie's 9 Radiant Sword sect with him to Dao Emperor Academy. In other words, Chen Shi's friends and loved ones from all those years ago were living in Dao Emperor Academy. At this moment, the atmosphere within the Grand Hall of the Pine Mist City's Chen clan was solemn. Chen Shi sat upright at the central seat in the hall while his parents were seated on his left. Chen Hao was standing on Chen Shi's right instead. It was the second day since Chen Shi had returned, and Chen Hao intended to allow all the clansmen of the Chen clan to meet Che Shi and their parents. After all, numerous years had passed since Chen Shi left the last time, and there had been many new descendants and disciples of the Chen clan throughout this period. As members of the Chen clan, it would definitely not make any sense if they couldn't even recognize Chen Shi, Chen Lingjun, and Wuxia Shui. Chen Shi naturally had no objections towards such arrangements. He wanted to see how many new descendants had appeared in the Chen clan throughout this period. Of course, Chen Shi had found out about all of this from the memories of his clone, but he still had to carry out these formalities. If a clan didn't have its rules and order, then it would definitely be unable to survive forever. Not to mention that Chen Lingjun and Wuxia Shui had returned. Even though they'd heard about the transformation of the Chen clan from Chen Shi, they hadn't witnessed it with their own 2 eyes. So, Chun Shi and Chun Hao naturally had to satisfy their parents' wishes. According to Chun Shi's intentions, the position of patriarch should naturally be given to Chun Lingjun since he'd returned. However, Chun Lingjun had refused, and it was even to the extent that he refused to take the seat of the host and have an audience with the juniors of the Chun clan. So, Chun Shi had no choice but to sit alone at the central seat of the host. Let's begin. Chun Shi waved his hand casually when he noticed that it was time. Chun Hao immediately stepped forward and spoke in a low voice. Disciples standing outside the hall, enter according to your seniority and greet the seniors of our clan. As soon as he finished speaking, Fei Lingcue, Qing Xiui, and Fan Yunlan walked into the hall. Father, mother. The three of them stepped forward and bowed as they greeted Chun Lingjun and Zhuoqiu Shui with respectful, shy, and various other expressions. Chun Lingjun smiled as he nodded. On the other hand, Zhuoqiu Shui withdrew a hairpin, jade bracelet, and jade pendant before giving them to Fei Lingcue, Qing Xiui, and Fan Yunlan. After that, the three of them walked over to stand behind Chun Lingjun and Zhuoqiu Shui. Even if their cultivations were extraordinary, and they had varying dispositions, they didn't dare violate the formalities of the clan at such a moment. Chun Shi and Chun Hao couldn't help but exchange glances and smile when they noticed this. Meanwhile, another group walked into the hall. The figure in the lead was Chun En, and he had his wife Wei Zitong by his side. Chun Yu was also beside him, and he was walking with his wife Yu Wenting. Grandfather, grandmother. The two pairs of husband and wife stepped forward, knelt down, and kowtowed respectfully to Chun Lingjun and Zhuoqiu Shui before they bowed to Chan Shi. Chun 11 glanced at his son, Chun En, before he glanced at his nephew, Chun Yu. He thought about how these two little fellows had been young children all those years ago while he was in the Darchu dynasty. Yet now, they were independent and mature men who'd established their own families, and it truly made Chun Shi sigh endlessly with emotion. Rise. Chun Shi waved his hand, and then he spoke seriously. As sons of the Chun clan, both of you must shoulder the responsibility of protecting the glory of the clan. Remember my words well. Chan En, Chen Yu, and their respective wives listened solemnly before they stood at the side of the hall. What are you afraid of? It's not like my father would eat you. It's not that. You can go in yourself if you continue hesitating. Chun Nua, will just act like I've never known you. Nua, calm down. I'm just a little nervous. I'm coming. Meanwhile, the sound of argument resounded from outside the hall, and then a man and woman walked into the hall. The woman in the lead had a slender figure. Her long hair was tied up in a bun behind her head, and she was beautiful to the extreme. She was around 70% similar in appearance to Fan Yunlan, and only her brows that were pitch black like ink resembled Chun Shi. She was Chun Shi and Fan Yunlan's daughter, Chun Nua. There was a very ordinary-looking man following closely by her side. But while he looked ordinary, his entire body emanated a firm and steady aura. However, he couldn't avoid becoming nervous upon entering the hall, and he lowered his head slightly while he didn't know where to put his hands. Chun Lingjun couldn't help but ask when he saw this. She's Nua? She really is a pretty young lady. Especially those brows of her. They are simply exactly alike to Sheer. Fan Yunlan hurriedly said from behind him. Father really has a discerning gaze. Thuno, quickly come over and kowtow to your grandfather. Chan Nua disregarded the agreement of the man by her side and just pulled him over to Chun Lingjun and Zhuoqiu Shui before she knelt down and greeted them. Grandfather, grandmother. As soon as she finished speaking, she noticed that the man by her side was sweating profusely and seemed to be unable to speak. Chun Nua's beautiful brows instantly knit together, and she said angrily, Are you mute? Why aren't you speaking? Fan Yunlan glared at Chun Nua. Nua, don't be disrespectful. Chun Lingjun and Zhuoqiu Shui were very amused by this scene, and they didn't mind at all. Nua, who's he? Chun Nua puckered her lips, shot a sideways glance at the man, and then said, You tell them yourself. You're usually completely composed and are even unafraid of death, so why are acting so fearfully today? Could it be that you've been acting all along? The man smiled bitterly when he heard this. He was nervous to the point his clothes were drenched with sweat, and he seemed to be in a rather embarrassing state. Chen Nuo grew even angrier when she saw him like that. It was the grandest ceremony of the sect today, and every single clansman of the Chun clan was deeply afraid of making mistakes, so they'd been waiting outside the hall since last night. But this fellow actually made such an embarrassing display at such a moment. So Chen Nuo truly wondered how she would hold her head up high in the Chen clan from now on. All right, I'll introduce him. Chen Shi, who'd been silent until now, suddenly smiled as he pointed a finger at the man and spoke. His name is Chen Yen, and he's a disciple I took while I cultivated in the 9 Radiant Sword sect all those years ago. However, I never imagined that he would have actually grown to such a state after so many years have passed, and he has taken over the position of sect master in the 9 Radiant Sword sect. He really didn't disappoint me. Chen Shi's voice was faint like the wind, yet it sounded like the chanting of the Grand Tao when it entered Chen Yan's ears, and it caused his anxiousness to be completely wiped away and be replaced by calm. Haha, big brother, there's something you aren't aware of. This fellow, Chen Yan, and that little girl, Nanua, have been together for many years, and all they lack is the ceremony to become Tao companions. Chen Hao roared with laughter as he spoke. Since it's like that, then why haven't they become Tao companions? Chen Shi was surprised. Chen Nuo puckered her lips and remained silent. Chen Yen was just about to explain when Chen Nuo glared at him and caused him to instantly shut his mouth while revealing an embarrassed expression. Fan Yunlan had no choice but to explain when she saw this. That little girl was too stubborn, and she refused to listen to anyone. She insisted on waiting until you return before you personally hold the ceremony for her. Chen Shi was stunned, and then a wisp of guilt couldn't help but surge into his heart as he said, "Leave it to me. Since my daughter is about to be married, then it naturally has to be a grand ceremony. Feel free to tell me about any requests you have. Father will definitely satisfy them all." Chen Nuo's eyes lit up. Really? Chen Shi smiled. Of course. Chen Nuo intended to continue speaking but was dragged away by Fang Yunlan. At the same time, she said to Chen Yen, "You come over as well. Today is a grand day for the Chun clan, so put those matters aside for now." Chen Yen nodded, and then he hurriedly followed Fan Yunlan and stood by Chen Nuo's side. Chen Shi couldn't help but be surprised by all of this. Chen Yen was a quiet, reticent, and firm person, so he really wondered how a lively young girl like Nuo would have taken a liking to him. As if he'd seen through Chen Shi's thoughts, Chen Hao spoke via voice transmission. Since that little girl, Nuo, heard that Chen Yan's character was extremely alike to Big Brother when you were younger, she started to pay attention to him, and they naturally got closer as time passed. Chen Shi was speechless. He'd suffered a huge calamity in his clan when he was young, and it caused him to become quiet and unsociable. Never had he imagined that that little girl, Nuo, would actually make it into a standard for her Tao companion. However, so long as his children didn't make huge mistakes, Chen Shi would usually not be against them. Not to mention that Chen Yen was his first disciple in this world, so his daughter wouldn't suffer any grievance if she married him. Meanwhile, another pair or man and woman walked into the hall. The man was dignified, noble, and in high spirits, and he had starry eyes and slanted brows. The woman was delicate, cute, and extraordinarily beautiful. They were Chen Yu and Yu Wenting's son, Chen Baojing, and Chen and Wei Zidong's daughter, Chen Yunji. Great-grandfather, great-grandmother. Chen Baojing and Chen Yunji knelt down and kowtowed, causing Chen Lingjun and Zhuoqiu Shui to beam, while feeling indescribably happy in their hearts. Even though they knew that they'd become great-grandparents, they still couldn't help but sigh with emotion and be filled with joy when they saw their great-grandchildren. Grandfather! Grandfather! After that, Chen Baojing and Chen Yunji kowtowed to Chen Shi. Rise! Chen Shi smiled. When he met them all those years ago, both of them were only around the age of 5 or 6, yet they'd grown up into adults now. Moreover, they'd even attained the golden immortal realm, and they could truly be said to be dazzling. After that, numerous other members of the Chun clan entered the hall in succession, and all of them greeted Chen Lingjun, Zhuoqiu Shui, and Chen Shi. All of them had been recruited into the Chun clan by Chun Hao while the Chun clan was still in Pine Mist City all those years ago, and they were considered branch line descendants of the Chun clan. Even though they weren't related by blood, they were already considered full members of the Chun clan as they'd accompanied the Chun clan as it went through the tests and trials of the past. She finally met all the clansmen of the Chun clan when night was almost upon them, and the grand and spacious hall was filled with over 1,000 figures. All of them were the core forces of the Chun clan, and they were the foundation that Chun Hao had gradually established through his years as patriarch. She sighed with emotion as he gazed at such a scene. He was very clearly aware that while he traveled the world all of these years, his younger brother actually hadn't had a moment of rest while growing and strengthening the clan. On the other hand, Chun Lingjun and Wuxia Shue's hearts surged with emotion. The Chun clan had been practically destroyed when they left all those years ago. Yet it hadn't just recovered its past glory, it was even countless times stronger than it was. So, how could they possibly maintain their calm? All of this is thanks to Sheer and Hauer. Chun Lingjun sighed. Wuxia Shui deeply agreed. Amongst the two brothers, one dealt with external affairs and fought throughout the cosmos. The other dealt with internal affairs and rebuilt the entire clan. The Pine Mist City's Chun clan would definitely not possess its current accomplishments if it weren't for the two of them. At night on that very same day, the Chun clan's ancestral hall. The entire ancestral hall was illuminated brightly by candlelight, and the atmosphere here seemed tranquil and solemn as it illuminated Chun Tianli's memorial tablet. Chun Shi walked forward. He respectfully removed Chun Tianli's memorial tablet before a strand of divine flames appeared out of thin air and instantly incinerated the memorial tablet into nothingness. After that, he took a deep breath and flicked the tip of his finger lightly. A strand of obscure and mysterious energy of samsara seemed like it came from time immemorial and carried a boundlessly ethereal aura. It was like it surged through both past, present, and even through the barriers of karma as it moved along the pathways of destiny to converge at the tip of his finger. At this moment, Chun Lingjun, Wuxia Shui, and Chun Hao who stood behind him couldn't avoid feeling nervous. A blurry figure gradually appeared amidst the draw of the energy of samsara. The energy of samsara vanished swiftly along with a wave of strange rumbling, and then a hunched and aged figure had appeared within the ancestral hall. He had a withered face, muddy eyes, and gray hair. The body beneath his large gray clothes was like a bag of bones. He simply seemed like he had one foot in the grave. At this moment, Chun Lingjun, Wuxia Shui, and Chun Hao couldn't help but open their eyes wide, while their entire bodies trembled with excitement. "What's going on?" The old man spoke in a hoarse voice, and he gazed at the surroundings with wonder. "Haven't I died already? Why, have I awakened once more? Could it be that I didn't die?" Thump! Chun Lingjun and Wuxia Shui knelt on the ground, and they were choking with sobs. "Father!" Chun Hao knelt on the ground as well, and his fierce eyes were filled with tears. "Grandfather!" The old man was instantly stunned on the spot, and he seemed like he'd been struck by lightning. He just stared blankly at Chun Lingjun and Wuxia Shui while seeming to not dare believe his eyes. A long time passed before he finally spoke with a trembling voice. "You too?" What? What's going on?" She stepped forward and supported the old man's gaunt body and said, "Grandfather, we're all reunited now." The old man was Chun Tianli. All those years ago, he'd suffered an ambush while taking Chun Hao to the Thousand Sword Sect, and he'd perished in that ambush. Yet now, Chun Shi who'd taken control of destiny and samsara had revived him. However, his consciousness still remained at the moment before his death. Chun Shi wasn't in a rush. So long as Chun Tianli had come back to life, then it wouldn't be long before he could understand everything. The only regret Chun Shi had was that he was too young when calamity struck the Chun clan all those years ago. So he didn't remember the faces of those members of the Chun clan who'd passed away at that time. His memory of them was completely blank. So, even with his current ability, Chun Shi was only able to rescue Chun Tianli from the eternal cycle of samsara. On that very night, Chun Shi, Chun Lingjun, Wuxia Shui, and Chun Hao accompanied Chun Tianli and described everything that had occurred throughout these years. Early in the morning on the next day, Xianxia left the ancestral hall on his own because Xianxia was waiting there. "Martial uncle." Xianxia stepped forward and bowed before he said, "Your old friends from all those years ago have arrived, and they are waiting for you in the academy." Xianxia nodded. He knew that those friends of his would definitely hear of his return and rush over, and it was exactly what he looked forward to. After all, too many years had passed since he last met them before leaving the immortal dimension for the ancient god domain. "What about martial uncle Jiyu?" Suddenly, Xianxia seemed to have thought of something. Xianxia said, "Martial ancestral uncle Jiyu said that since everything has been resolved now, he has nothing holding him back anymore. So, he left yesterday, and he said he was heading to the Tao Terra Firma in search of the secrets of the ultimate path." "That's good." Xianxia stopped hesitating and left the Chun clan swiftly with Xianxia. Tao Emperor Academy. At this moment, numerous figures were gathered at the spacious square of Vai, and they formed a dense mass that was waiting with anticipation. Dong! Along with a clear and melodious ring of a bell, the atmosphere here instantly became solemn and silent. After that, everyone looked with blazing anticipation as Xianxia's tall figure appeared before the hall at the square. At this instant, the hearts of everyone here surged, and they either felt excitement, happiness, roared with laughter, sighed with emotion. As he stood there and gazed at those figures that were standing on the square, all sorts of emotions surged in his heart, and he found it difficult to maintain his composure. Time seemed to have frozen at this moment. Xianxia's gaze swept through them slowly. He saw Du Qingxi, Songlin, Duanmuze, the supreme elder of the Wandering Cloud Sword sect, Beihang, the sect master of the Wandering Cloud Sword sect, Ling Kongzi, the Old Turtle King, Xianjing, the Nine-Tailed Fox King, Qingqiu, and many others. At that time, Xianxia was just a youth who'd just stepped onto his path of cultivation in Pine Mist City. He overcame all the obstacles before him to enter Dragon Lake City, seized the first position on the Hidden Dragon rankings, and became renowned throughout the Southern Territory. During that time, it was Du Qingxi, Songlin, Duanmuze, and all of these other old friends of his who had witnessed his growth. That memory belonged to his youth, and it was indescribably delightful that all of his old friends were here. In next to no time, Xianxia noticed Zhao Qinghe, fourth young master Zhou, Ling Yu, Huangfu Qingying, Yu Shenshin, and the others. At that time, Xianxia had risen into prominence in the Southern Territory, was renowned throughout the Darchu dynasty, and he'd taken the championship during the All-Star meeting at Silken City. Zhao Qinghe and all of these other friends were those who'd witnessed all of that. They'd left side by side from the Darchu dynasty and entered the primeval battlefield, and it was there that they became friends who trusted their lives to each other. Xianxia's gaze continued moving, and he saw the sect master of the Nine Radiant Sword sect, Wen Huiding, and he saw all of his senior brothers and senior sisters from West Radiance Peak, like his eldest senior brother Hua Moyan, his second senior brother Lu Shang, third senior brother Yi Chenzi, fourth senior brother Duan Yi, and fifth senior sister Aju. He saw Meng Wei and Emoya from the Ninth Hell, and the youths from the Ninth Hell tribe which he'd separated into the Violet Lightning and Azure Frost camps. However, all of those youths were grown up now. Even Huji Shuyan, Shinlangya, and Ku, and Enwei from the Nine Radiant Sword sect were there as well. All of them had witnessed Xianxia's journey through the dark reverie. At that time, Xianxia was just a disciple of the Nine Radiant Sword sect. At that time, perhaps even they had never imagined that they would form such a relationship with Xianxia, right? Besides them, he saw the Nether Spring Grand Emperor and Cui Qingning from the Netherworld. He saw Yi Tang, Zhao Mingli, Zhen Lu, and Ji Xinbing from Dao Emperor Academy. He saw Shi Yu and Xiang Liili from Nuwas Dao Palace. He saw the instructors of Dao Emperor Academy like Zhou Zhili, Qi Zongxing, Hua Jiankong. All of his old friends had actually converged at the square of Vai. Even Xianxia couldn't help but feel dazed and stare blankly at them while he gazed at their familiar faces and recalled their experiences in the past. Meanwhile, all of these friends of his were looking at him as well, and their hearts surged incessantly. As they gazed at each other, the past was like a dream in their minds, and their feelings were completely different when they were reunited now. "Bring the wine. We'll drink until we drop." She suddenly roared with laughter while emotions surged in his heart. At this moment, there was no need for any words, as it was only natural to replace their words with wine. "We'll drink until we drop," the others agreed in a clamorous wave of voices. According to the records of Tao Emperor Academy, the Supreme Sovereign drank to his heart's content with all his friends on that day, and they only stopped after 7 days and 7 nights. All were drunk and they slept on the spot. Only the Supreme Sovereign laid comfortably high above the sky, drinking all by himself while smiling silently. Only he understood the feelings in his heart. After his reunion with his old friends, she seemed as if he'd evaporated into thin air, and he vanished completely. No one knew where he'd gone, but no one worried about him anymore. Presently, even the Heaven Tao had bowed beneath Xi's feet, so how could anyone harm him? He was the one and only Supreme Sovereign. Just this title alone was sufficient to prove Xi's extraordinary status. The Tao Terra Firma. Since you've decided, then just follow your heart. As for all of us old fellows here, we only seek the world behind that invisible door. Fuxi spoke casually. The invisible door he spoke of was the true ultimate path. She had laid eyes on that door and seen the world behind it. Now, Fuxi Nuwa, the divine dark parasol tree, the first Netherworld Emperor, and all the other extraordinary figures were seeking that invisible door in the Tao Terra Firma. But at this moment, they had no choice but to stop because of Xi's arrival. Because Xi had come here to resolve something. He intended to resolve something important that was related to the order of the world. Yes, you don't have to worry about it. We've seen through all of it a very long time ago, so we would naturally not linger here any longer. Actually, there's no need for you to remind us because we've already decided not to return. Nuwa smiled as she spoke. She was similarly clearly aware that She had only come here for a single reason. He intended to reorganize the Netherworld, Mortal Dimension, Immortal Dimension, and even Ancient God Domain. He wanted to bring all of them beneath the order of Samsara. In that way, the situation throughout the world would become completely different. The new order would replace the old to circulate through the world. Under such circumstances, regardless of one's strength or status, even Tao Lords would have no choice but to be bound by the order of the Heaven Tao. Those who committed good deeds would be rewarded, while those who committed evil would be punished. No one could avoid being bound by this order. It was the order of the world. It tolerated no offense once it was set. So, whether Fuxi, Nuwa, and the other extraordinary figures accepted such order was a problem. That was exactly why She had come here personally. Fortunately, Fuxi and the others weren't against it, and it undoubtedly allowed Shi to heave a sigh of relief. Truthfully speaking, if he was unable to obtain their acknowledgement, then even Shi would find it very troublesome if they were to go against the order of the Heaven Tao in the future. Punish Fuxi and the others? That was impossible for him, but if he didn't punish them, then the newly created order would be meaningless. It's a good thing. The Heaven Tao is righteous, and it should be used as a catalyst to educate all living beings and maintain the world. Only then would all living beings possess the right to survive and exist, and innocence wouldn't be affected by the karma of others. The first Netherworld Emperor spoke in a deep voice. The stronger one is, the more one should be restrained. Otherwise, it would only become the source of a calamity that brings hardships and suffering to all living beings. The sovereign sect was the best example of that. Yes, the original reason for order wasn't to take control of the world, and it was to provide even the tiniest living beings with the ability to survive. That's the breadth of mind that a supreme figure of the world should possess. Go ahead and do it. The world should have been changed a long time ago, the old eliminated to make way for the new. Only then can eternal peace be created. The others spoke successively. She took a deep breath and bowed seriously to all of them. Thank you, seniors. As soon as he finished speaking, he was just about to bid them farewell, but was stopped by Fuxi, who said, "Do you really not intend to head through that door to the world beyond it once you're done with everything?" The others looked at him as well with gazes of anticipation. They really wanted to travel to that unknown world with Shi in the future. Shi shrugged and said, "Let's talk about it when the time comes." At the very least, I don't intend to leave for now. Fuxi and the others couldn't help but feel a trace of regret. However, they were clearly aware that Xianxia's heart wasn't there, so they didn't persuade him further and just watched as he left. 1 month later, regardless of whether it was the mortal dimension, netherworld, immortal dimension, ancient god domain, forgotten grounds of chaos, godrank mountain, the origin world, and various other planes and worlds, the order of the heaven Tao which enveloped them suddenly underwent a transformation. Countless clear and glistening divine chains of order formed a dense net that covered the cosmos, and they emanated boundlessly vast divine might. Moreover, waves of the rumbling of the Tao resounded like the sound of nature, and it reverberated through the world. On this day, all the living beings throughout the cosmos were shocked, and they stopped what they were doing. What's going on? Is the heaven Tao changing again? How terrifying! Is doomsday coming? Innumerable clamorous voices undulated and resounded throughout every single plane. Such a shocking phenomenon was absolutely unprecedented. Right when all living beings were in a state of anxiety, a practically ethereal figure suddenly appeared in the sky that was changing indeterminately. He sat cross-legged there as if he'd spear open the heavens, and all the grand Taos of the world could only submit before him and stand on guard around him. His figure seemed ethereal yet was also omnipresent, and it made everyone feel like a pair of unseen eyes was watching all of them. Many living beings couldn't help but prostrate themselves on the ground and kowtow endlessly, whereas the extraordinary experts of the world felt an indescribably terrifying pressure which caused them to instinctively prostrate themselves while reverence filled their hearts. Such a scene occurred at the same time throughout the cosmos. The heaven Tao is incomplete, so I shall mend it. That was the first sentence spoken by the ethereal figure, and it rumbled through every inch of the world. The birth of samsara establishes order. It is the cycle of karma and the revival of conscience. My wish is for the kind to be repaid with kindness, and the evil to be repaid with evil, to give life to the world, to create a path for all living beings, to pass down the knowledge of all predecessors, and to bring peace to the world. Every single word reverberated through the world like the rumbling of the Tao. At this instant, auspicious light descended from the sky, golden lotuses surged out from the ground, and the order of the heaven Tao circulated as a completely new curtain of order was created. This was the 9th era. 9 was the end of numbers that led back to 1, and it was completed with samsara being brought into the world. The establishment of the order of samsara had rid the heaven Tao of its flaws. The hearts of all living beings were moved, and they prostrated themselves on the ground as they worshipped endlessly with devotion. Such a scene seemed like it continued for a boundlessly long period yet also seemed like it came to an end in an instant. When that grand and ethereal voice finished resounding, all living beings seemed like they'd awakened from a dream. The change in the sky had vanished, and it was completely clear now. Moreover, that figure which was like a supreme sovereign seemed as if it had never existed. Everything was no different than it was in the past. All living beings were stunned by this scene. When they thought about it carefully, they noticed that their minds were completely blank. They weren't able to recall anything. This was what it meant when it was said that the Grand Tao was nameless and invisible. Only Tao Lords who'd grasped the Grand Tao of Destiny were able to sense the unprecedented scene which had occurred just now. That was a true change in the heavens. It was the drawing of the curtains to new order and a new era. The generations of the future regarded this day as the Day of Illumination. Very few living beings throughout the cosmos understood what this day represented or what its name meant. Only a small group of people knew that it was in remembrance of a man called Chun, she who'd brought light to the world. After he finished doing all of that, Chun-Shi returned to Tao Emperor Academy, and he went directly into the world within the tiny cauldron without alerting anyone. He'd done all he needed to do, and he could leave the rest to the order of the heaven Tao. At this moment, Chun-Shi only wanted to be with his family and enjoy being reunited with them. However, he suddenly stopped moving when he was just about to return to the Chun clan's grand hall. He seemed to have sensed something, and it made his expression change indeterminately. At this moment, numerous beautiful figures were gathered within the hall. Every single one of them was gorgeous to the extreme, and they were simply matchless in their beauty. They were either pretty and quiet, gentle and graceful, delicate and charming, cold like ice, sly and lively, young and appealing, gorgeous and resplendent, dignified and virtuous. Because of these beautiful women with all sorts of appearances, the empty hall was actually filled with a resplendent, shocking, grand, and gorgeous aura. At this moment, Zhuoqiu Shui was seated at the central seat of the host, and the smile on her lips had never reduced at all while she gazed at all the women seated in the hall. Zhuoqiu Shui had truly never expected that her son would have actually taken the hearts of so many women throughout the years. Moreover, every single one of them was superb and rare beauties. Even she, his mother, couldn't help but gasp with admiration. The thing that made Zhuoqiu Shui really speechless was practically more than half of these women were pursuing her son instead. At this moment, even Zhuoqiu Shui couldn't avoid feeling self-satisfied, while she constantly repeated the same words in her heart. As expected of my son. He hasn't just won the world. He even makes all beauties in the world fall before him. But it wasn't long before Zhuoqiu Shui couldn't help but have a headache. After all of these women hadn't gathered here for fun. Even though they hadn't said anything, someone like Zhuoqiu Shui was naturally able to instantly discern that they'd come for her son. As for their objective, there was no need to guess it at all. They'd definitely come here to join her Chun clan. Unfortunately, Zhuoqiu Shui absolutely refused to make decisions related to such matters on Xianxia's behalf. She wasn't sure which one of them her son likes, and if she were to make the wrong choice, then it wouldn't just be her son who would complain about it to her. It would probably cause both Qing Shui and Fan Yunlan, who were already Xianxia's wives, to be displeased. So, Zhuoqiu Shui had no choice but to speak ambiguously when she faced all of the beauties in the hall, and she just spoke about all sorts of insignificant matters. However, she'd already started calculating in her heart. Du Qingxi, Muyao, Yaqing, Yunna, and Yan Yan are girls that Xir got to know while he was cultivating in the mortal dimension, yet they're still infatuated with him after so many years and have waited until now. They really can't be treated unfairly. As for Huangfu Qingying, Su Qingyan, Xiaowei, and Bei Ling, they had quite a good relationship with Xir all those years ago, and they are such extraordinary beauties. If it's possible, then I'm really unwilling for them to continue being in such a situation. Oh, there's Cui Qingning as well. She's a key figure that managed the netherworld and did a huge amount for Xir. Liang Bing isn't bad either. Oh, her dressing is really outstanding. I heard that she helped Xir deal with a great deal of danger all those years ago. Humph. Zhao Mingli said she came here just to join in the fun. But she actually has feelings for him deep within her heart as well. She thinks I don't know? But a descendant of the true Phoenix clan like her is really gorgeous. If she is able to become Dao companions with Xir, then I wonder how gorgeous their children would be. Wait, I can't forget that little girl, Ming. If it's in terms of being acquainted with all of them, then Ming followed us back all the way from the primal chaos origin. If she doesn't leave later, then I'll definitely make her stay. Zhuoqiu Shui was considering and weighing everything in her heart as she gazed at the women in the hall. But she had a greater headache the more she thought about it. In the end, she suddenly noticed that it was extremely painful to make a choice amongst them. Every single one of them was so outstanding, and every single one of them had a relationship with her son, Xianxia, that could be remembered for eternity. Under such circumstances, Zhuoqiu Shui didn't dare decide for Xianxia at all. No wonder the others ran far away and were deeply afraid of being swept into all of this. So it was only I who just realized that it would be a huge headache when there were many women to deal with. Zhuoqiu Shui sighed with emotion in her heart, and she suddenly felt pity for her son because he owed a debt to so many gorgeous women. At this moment, Xianxia, who was outside the hall, had sensed all of this clearly, and his scalp couldn't help but go numb. Even if he possessed the might of a supreme sovereign, and even if the entire cosmos could only submit beneath his feet, he was still unable to maintain his calm when he faced matters of the heart. Indeed, he'd run into too many indescribably beautiful and striking women throughout his path of cultivation. However, Xianxia had been wholeheartedly concentrated on his path of cultivation, and there were also many other reasons that made it impossible for him to give them a clear promise or answer. So, he could only bury all of those feelings at the bottom of his heart. He had no choice but to stop thinking about all of it. because the responsibilities and pressure on his shoulders were too heavy and numerous, and he was afraid that he would disappoint them. But it was completely different now. Everything was done, and all the responsibility and pressure on his shoulders had been alleviated. So, logically speaking, Xianxia could truly face this problem now. However, only when he was truly facing it did Xianxia realize that he was still completely inexperienced when it came to the matters of the heart. Most importantly, he was a father and even grandfather now, yet he still owed so many women a debt of love. So, it was obvious how heavy the pressure on Xianxia's heart was. What should I do? What exactly should I do? Xianxia's expression changed indeterminately as he stood on the spot, and he was in an endless struggle within his heart. It was simply much more difficult than his fight with the sovereign sex master. He hated that the matters of the heart weren't as straightforward as battle was because the outcome could be determined with ease. Grandfather, when did you get back? Right at this moment, a pleasantly surprised voice resounded abruptly, and then Chen Baojing suddenly appeared in the distance. Xianxia was instantly jolted away from his chaotic thoughts, and then he seemed to have realized something, causing his face to instantly turn gloomy. He pointed a finger at Chen Baojing and scolded. Little bastard. There's no need to shout so loudly even if you noticed that I've returned. Are you intentionally trying to put your grandfather on the spot? Chen Baojing smiled slyly, and then he suddenly shouted in the direction of the grand hall. Great-grandmother, my grandfather is back. You don't have to continue suffering a headache. You can just pass all of it to him. Xianxia slapped Chen Baojing's butt from afar, and it hurt to the point Chen Baojing grimaced in pain and cried out loudly before he said, Great-grandmother! Great-grandmother! Grandfather is going to kill me if you don't come soon. Xianxia was instantly rendered helpless, and he glared fiercely at Chen Baojing before he turned around and left. He didn't dare stay here for another moment because he felt guilty and afraid as soon as he thought about all of those women surrounding him. However, the commotion created by Xianxia and Chen Baojing had alarmed all the beauties within the hall. So a wave of shouts resounded before Xianxia could even escape. Xianxia! Xianxia! You're back! Stop right there! I'll take my life right now if you dare to leave. You've already delayed for so many years. Are you going to give us a clear answer or not? Tell us right now if you don't like us. We'll leave right away and won't bother you again. Big brother Xianxia, why are you avoiding us like this? Could it be that we made you unhappy? Voices that either carried sadness, anger, misery, or grief undulated from within the hall, and then all the beauties charged out of the hall and gazed at Xianxia. At this moment, Xianxia's figure had stiffened on the spot while cold sweat was even dropping down from the tip of his nose. On the other hand, his mother, Wuxia Shui, who stood at the back of the crowd of beauties, could only shoot a helpless glance at her son. After that, she pulled on the ear of Chen Baojing, who intended to continue watching the show, and left this place. Xianxia opened his mouth yet was at a loss for words. All right, stop forcing him. Let me calm down a little. However, it really can't be delayed any longer and should be resolved. Right at this moment, Liang stepped forward and spoke flatly. Xianxia instantly glanced at his senior sister with a grateful gaze, and then he nodded firmly. Right, it would be good to let me calm down. However, Liang grunted coldly and said, Little junior brother, it's not that I'm unwilling to help you, but based on these current circumstances, don't you think you should provide a promise of an exact time frame? Xianxia was instantly troubled. However, all the women couldn't help but feel angry when they saw him act in this way, and their gazes either carried resentment, sorrow, or misery as they gazed at him, causing him to feel utterly uncomfortable. Xianxia was just about to open his mouth and speak when he heard a voice suddenly resound from afar. Xianxia, don't forget that I've been constantly taking care of your clansmen in the world within the cauldron throughout these years. A graceful figure appeared soundlessly at the side. She seemed dreamlike and ethereal, and her exquisite and peerlessly beautiful face was covered in a wisp of divine light. Surprisingly, it was the spirit within Emperor Yu's 9-continent divine cauldron, the tiny cauldron which had fought by Xianxia's side for many years, It was the primeval Emperor Yu's daughter, Yu Lin. Yu? Could it be that? Xianxia was utterly dazed, and he felt a rather terrible headache rising up within him. What? You refused to agree? Yu Lin spoke slowly. Xianxia instantly laughed bitterly. He glanced at those women before the hall, and then he glanced at Yu Lin, and he felt that while he had extraordinary wisdom and strength, he was actually at a loss for what to do right now. Xianxia, do you remember the promise you made me when you left all those years ago? Meanwhile, another clear and melodious voice resounded. A young woman in a green dress had her hands behind her back as she walked over from afar as this voice resounded. She had pure starry eyes and a clear and extraordinary appearance. It was Axiu, my promise from all those years ago. In his days, Xianxia recalled everything that had occurred in the mortal dimension. He recalled the scenes of him traveling through Taotai City, the capital of delicacies, with Axiu. He recalled how Axiu hadn't hesitated to exhaust her strength to resist Saint Emperor Gue Su's full-forced attack and save his life. All those years ago when he left the immortal dimension, Axiu had asked him a similar question. At that time, she'd withdrawn a jade book and passed it to him before she left immediately. Even now, she still remembered the words written on that jade book. When we meet next, I want you to do something in front of the entire world. Marry me. At that time, Xianxia's heart had been shaken while all sorts of emotions surged through it, and he'd agreed without the slightest hesitation. So when he met Axiu now, it seemed like it was really the time to fulfill his promise. Xianxia fell silent. He glanced at Axiu, Yu Lin, Li Yang, and all the other women who had emotional entanglements with him, and then the perturbed and anxious emotions in his heart calmed down. All right, I agree. Xianxia took a deep breath and spoke word by word. Axiu suddenly started smiling, and her beautiful face was peerlessly radiant. Li Yang instinctively said, "Then what about us?" Xianxia was stunned, and he spoke with astonishment. "Senior sister, you?" The other women were stunned as well. Never had they imagined that Li Yan actually had been hiding malicious intent, and intended to encroach on Xianxia as well. Li Yang instantly turned angry out of embarrassment, and she glared fiercely at Xianxia and gnashed her teeth. "Get to the point. Tell us, do you agree or not?" Xianxia's heart shook. He didn't know where he got the impulse and zeal to do it, but he roared with laughter and said, "I agree. I agree to it all. All of you didn't abandon me throughout these years, so I, Xianxia, will accompany all of you until the end. The end."